Jason Sumners.
Morning, everyone. It's great to see so many staff in attendance. Appreciate you all being here. Had a great evening last night. I know some of the commissioners took advantage of the local hunting opportunities yesterday. So it's been a good meeting so far. All right. Yeah, speaking of the fall hunting season, we're certainly in the midst of it with waterfowl hunting season full in swing, deer season full in swing. The fall hunting season has brought a bunch of notable updates. In October, those hunters that were drawn for black bear hunting permits successfully harvested 15 bears, the most that we have taken in the past. Tomorrow, we will have the opening of the firearms portion of our elk hunting season. Archers successfully harvested 2 elk, including one absolutely phenomenal bull taken by a young lady during the archery portion of the elk season. Deer hunters have been out in the woods and after it. 159,000 deer were taken during the November portion of the firearms deer season. Harvest certainly down just a little bit. Part of that attributed to the shift in the calendar dates with everything in November being a little later, and certainly good acorn production and quite variable weather during that time period as well. Our youth hunters have been very successful this fall. One good thing about the calendar shift is they got the first weekend of November, which we always see a tremendous spike in harvest for our young hunters. So young hunters ages 6 through 15 harvested just short of 14,000 deer during the early youth portion of November 2nd and 3rd, up from 11,000 deer harvested during the early portion last year. Youth hunters harvested 2,500 deer during the late youth portion, which was November 29th through December 1st. Huge congratulations to our very own Laura Conley's daughter, Autumn, who got the youth harvest off to a good start, took her first deer during the archery season. Certainly proud of my son, Caleb, who successfully harvested his first deer on his grandpa's farm. My nephew, Cooper, who also harvested his first buck during the youth portion. So lots of exciting things happening. With season also comes mandatory sampling weekend. A huge thank you to all of our staff who make this weekend a success. Huge thank you to the hunters who continue to participate in this important sampling effort. Roughly 700 staff and 40 volunteers manned 74 stations and collected just over 18,000 samples statewide. Huge thanks to Commissioner McHenry, who joined me in Northwest Missouri, touring some sampling stations, and Margie, who joined Aaron, touring sampling stations in this part of the state. To date, we have just over 20 positives that have been detected. Unfortunately, that also includes 3 new counties, Texas County, Audrain, and Lewis County. So the sampling efforts will continue, and then we'll begin to initiate winter operations before long. Other exciting news, really excited that we'll be opening the new education center at Shepherd of the Hills Hatchery. The team has worked tirelessly to get the center ready to go, and we'll have a public opening next week on December 19th. Staff have been busy wrapping up the finishing touches and training new staff on how to use the facility as we prepare for the expected more than 250,000 people that will come through the doors in the next 12 months. The new building is 2.5 times larger than the old facility and boosts some new amenities. Really excited about the 7,500-gallon aquarium that will showcase rainbow and brown trout, which are raised at the facility. 2 classrooms will allow staff to conduct programs or teacher workshops, and interactive displays will hopefully help teach young and old about trout production and their value to Missouri. So really excited about the new education center. If you've been to headquarters recently, you certainly know there's a lot of activity going on there. With the renovations, stormwater structures have been in place in both the upper parking lots. Parking lot A has been milled and graded, and so we're expecting that to begin to be paved. New entrance from Truman Boulevard is full well in progress. New water lines and electrical lines are being installed, despite the brief interruption that occurred earlier this week with a broken water line. But when we're having that kind of construction activities, that's sort of to be expected. Visitor lot is close to being renovated as well. And so huge shout out to our infrastructure team. From my perspective, it seems like things are going along quite well, and really appreciate staff's patience as we work through this pretty major renovation effort. Huge congratulations to our education branch for being recognized for their exceptional work in bringing conservation to underserved areas of our state. The education team is awarded the Gold Award from the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Conservation Access, Relevancy, and Engagement Committee. Last year, our MDC team of education coordinators oversaw a 40% increase in the number of Tier 1 schools using MDC curriculum last year. This year, MDC has already added 14 curriculum units to those Tier 1 schools. They're on track to be serving Tier 1 schools at the same percentage as schools statewide by the end of the year. It truly is a one MDC effort. Although the coordination team, received the award, they acknowledge that the success is only possible because of the collaboration of our many partners, including our community conservation efforts, and our conservation educators. In October, we hosted the 8th Annual Partners Roundtable, the largest in-person roundtable we had, with 335 partners in attendance. We had the facility busting at the seams, which was really exciting. The theme of this year's Partners Roundtable was embracing integrated conservation, and we saw a host of speakers from a wide range of perspectives, really focusing on that topic. Thanks to Commissioner Eckelkamp for providing some opening words, and certainly thanks to Commissioner Wagner for being present both days as well. Planning for 2025 is already well underway. The end of October also brought a wrap to the trout season in Missouri. 2024 saw a slight increase from last year's total sales at 374,996 tags sold. And Clint will certainly provide some additional updates in the presentation about the impacts of flooding. Habitat highlights. Another edition of the Habitat highlights comes from Southwest region. MDC staff conducted a highly visible prescribed burn at the Andy Dalton shooting range. Burn unit was 21 acres and a mix of native grasses, non-native cool season grasses, and woody species. Staff from the range, Bodart Conservation Area, Talbot Conservation Area, and Southwest Regional Office participated. Well done effort by the team to successfully administering a needed habitat practice in a highly visible location. Staff also conducted a prescribed burn workshop for landowners in the Golden Grassland Priority Geography at Talbot Conservation Area. Remind you that the Golden Grasslands Priority Geography is one of the most recent ones we've added with our focus on grassland conservation, and certainly continued interest by private landowners in the area. Staff from the Frontier and North Slope District assisted with the workshop. 32 participants learned about how to effectively and safely utilize prescribed fire on their property. So appreciate staff's efforts to carry out that workshop. With the fall also brings our winter trout program into focus. November 1 marked the first day of the winter urban trout program in Missouri. We know from Cobalt data that the urban trout program is heavily utilized by members of the public. Unfortunately, because of warm conditions, we certainly did have to delay some stocking efforts, but we know folks were excited about that to happen. So for instance, Sykeston Recreational Park, you can see the visitation rates before 2022 when the lake was enrolled in the urban trout program. Visitation nearly doubled during the program from November to February. We see a very similar trend in other community lakes in which we've been able to stock trout. These lakes continue to be a great way for citizens to connect with nature. Some research highlights come from our science branch and regional resource management staff have been working diligently on invasive carp work. One of the focuses here is a harvest incentive program. The program is a 100% federally funded program that allows citizens to help manage the resource. Commercial fishermen receive a 10-cent per pound incentive for invasive carp harvest. And to date, we have 45 fishermen who have been enrolled with the program and have harvested more than 2.3 million pounds of carp in the first year. So really excited about to see where that program goes. On the topic of invasive species, Feral Hog Partnership eliminated 4,709 hogs so far in 2024. Aerial operations began on December 2nd and will go through mid-March. 7 of MDC's feral hog specialists are permitted to utilize drones as remote pilots. So again, an increased effort on the use of technology. We've developed new aerial operation communication plans to assist with targeted and prioritized planning and implementation of these efforts. Been working hard to streamline logistics as we work across 5 strike teams. Certainly, again, much like the large mass crop certainly impacted deer harvest, the large mass crop this fall will create challenging trapping conditions, but staff are really focusing on water sources. Plan to utilize GPS collars and expand our use of Judas pig operations across the state, which is we capture a pig, put a collar on it, and it allows us to identify the sounder and then go in and remove them. Staff continue to get creative in accessing remote locations. We'll be utilizing a jet boat to access remote locations along the Current River corridor, and again, use drones and helicopters to more efficiently and effectively remove feral swine. So strike team leaders are coordinating with our MU extension specialists to take a long-term approach to relationship building with landowners in what they've defined as landowner focus areas, which are places where we've had challenges developing the partnership, and so they're putting a real focus on some of those places where we continue to have challenges with feral hogs. Everybody's favorite MDC history notes. And finally, a few brief history notes here. In December 1938, Commission approves the FY budget of $432,013 for the year and officially approves the new Pittman-Robertson program in Missouri. 1957, Commission approved the purchase of Shell Osage as a wetland area. 1979, the Commission approved waiving permit fees, the permit requirement for those hunters over the age of 65. In 1994, visitors to the department's 4 nature centers in St. Louis, Blue Springs, Springfield, and Jefferson City totaled nearly 500,000. Today, the department operates 13 nature centers, interpretive centers for the public's enjoyment. And then I will close on somewhat of a slightly more somber note and recognize the passing of Jeff Sharan, who passed away peacefully on Friday, November 22nd, 2024 in Chillicothe. His love for the great outdoors was apparent in his tireless work for the department and numerous conservation organizations. As a former conservation commissioner, he played a significant role in conserving wildlife, a passion further illustrated by his appointment to the Conservation Commission by Governor Kit Bond in July of 1983. His passion for natural resources led him to serve in key roles, both locally and nationally, as a volunteer for the Nature Conservancy, Quail Unlimited, Conservation Federation Missouri, the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation, University of Missouri School of Natural Resources Advisory Council, and Ducks Unlimited. He was the finance chair for the Citizens Committee for the Design for Conservation, which resulted in the 1/8 of 1% conservation sales tax. In September of 2020, the commission recognized Jeff as a master conservationist, and in August of 2024, the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation recognized Jeff with the Governor's State of Missouri Conservation Award. I feel extremely fortunate that we all had the opportunity to spend time with Jeff at the October commission meeting in a place that was very special to his heart as we celebrated the ribbon cutting at the Fountain Grove Pump Station. So just wanted to take the opportunity to recognize Jeff. And with that, unless there are any questions, that concludes my update.
Thank you, Director. Commission, any questions for our Director?
All right.
No. At our October in Chillicothe, unbelievable. The legacy he has left behind will live on for many, many decades.
Well,
Thank you, Jason.
with that, I will introduce to you all Regional Administrator Calvert. Gary is a long-serving department employee. What are you up to? 46 years now, Gary? 45? 46. The governor's office recently recognized employees across state government that had served more than 40 years, and the department had 4 of those individuals. Gary is one of those and a shining example of what it means to be a true conservationist. So, Gary, the floor is yours.
I'd like to welcome you all to the St. Louis region and give you kind of a brief tour of what we do in the region and some of our staff. So currently, we have 163 great staff in all of the branches that serve in the St. Louis region. We have several regional projects, one MDC type projects that staff assist with. Some of these include waterfowl drawings on 2 intensively managed wetlands. We do an annual goose roundup. This year we captured 800 geese. We band wood ducks every year and band doves. Everyone contributes to our prescribed burning, pallid sturgeon release, and several other regional work days. Staff are also heavily involved in chronic wasting disease work, including mandatory sampling in 4 counties this year, and we're managing our winter targeted removal operations in 3 counties last year. This year we will be up to 5 core areas. Our community conservation team implemented about $470,000 in projects with 28 communities. 70% of that was spent in our Tier 1 and Tier 2 community conservation areas. In 25 to date, we have $790,000 allocated for projects with 40 communities. In addition, the conservation community conservation team manages 44 community assistant programs. Cap Lakes, 15 of those lakes are in Tier 1 and Tier 2. These lakes are owned by the community partners in city and county parks across the region. Several of these lakes serve as assistance resources for the area residents. The department assists with stocking, and our fishery staff provide management guidelines for these lakes to provide close to home fishing opportunities in these different communities. In FY24, the St. Louis regional staff worked with 74 partners, including cities, school districts, federal partners, and other community organizations. For the last 2 years, we have hosted a community conservation forum, which provides educational and collaboration building opportunities to the conservation partners working in the greater St. Louis area. In FY24, 140 attendees from 65 different organizations attended this conservation forum. Our staff work with private landowners. In FY24, the private land staff implemented $280,000 of cost share projects on 4,600 acres. 84% of that was in our priority areas. So far in FY25, we have allocated $270,000 in projects on 3,600 acres on private land. As you're aware, the St. Louis region has a large population, 2.1 million in our region. That's about 35% of the total state's population. Many of our conservation areas that attract large numbers of visitors. Bush area, for instance, attracts large numbers of visitors each year. In the St. Louis region, the department owns 97,000 acres and provides a wide variety of different recreational opportunities. These opportunities engage people where they live and promote the idea that we have a role to play in conservation. As a team, we did almost 19,000 acres of work. Over 3,000 acres of that work was in our Tier 1 priority geographies. Work done in a variety of terrestrial and aquatic habitats and included prescribed burning, forest and wetland, lake management, invasive species management, and other activities. Infrastructure management, you all have seen some of our larger projects we have going on now. Obviously, the roof replacement here on the regional office. We have a new road going in at Columbia Bottom, as well as the design phase of a setback levee that'll be started hopefully later this year. And we also have several other projects, construction projects going on to improve our infrastructure. Our natural history biologists and other staff with a variety of species of conservation concern and unique species associated with our natural communities around the region. Just a few include endangered plants and animals such as the current false aster found at Columbia Bottom Conservation Area. Tarantulas found on high-quality glades at Valley View. Also, staff support the Missouri Bumblebee Atlas and also conduct surveys and support the Heritage Database. You can see that picture on the left. That was a large timber rattlesnake that was caught next to our shop on the Weldon Spring area. Our education staff provide a variety of programs and opportunities across the region. Programs include nature hikes, plant and animal identification, outdoor cooking, fishing, archery, and shooting sports. Staff and volunteers showcase the agency at additional events throughout the year, including Muni at Forest Park, Tire Grove Park Pride Festival and Fall Frolic, Shaw Nature Reserve, Wild About Missouri events. These opportunities bring MDC to thousands of participants and strengthen the partnership with other entities. We also engage a lot of schools. St. Louis region has 7 conservation educators in addition to a community education assistant. Conservation educator team work with schools to provide teacher training and curriculum in an effort to connect students to nature. Curriculum includes Discover Nature Schools, Missouri National Archery in the Schools program, hunter education, and Discover Nature Fishing. Our protection staff provide the constituents with top-notch community policing and quality customer service. Protection staff completed over 21,000 law enforcement contacts, nearly 90,000 other public interactions, and conducted 200 radio and television interviews. Protection staff had over 17,000 participants in 385 programs. Throughout the year, there were a total of 1,600 resource violations, resulting in 600 citations and over 800 documented warnings. Some of the highlights across the region I'd like to share. St. Louis region is hosting the Midwest Fish and Wildlife Conference next month. Staff delivered 31 private land workshops and 18 community conservation workshops in 24. In addition, staff hosted a Midwest Bee Native Forum with key bee researchers from 11 states. On the Bush area, we sponsored the Grand Hunt Test that brought 1,000 retriever dogs from several states and Canadian provinces, and special fishing events on Cap Lakes and Tier 1 communities served 400 residents. That's all I have, unless you all have any questions.
Gary, thank you for this presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your leadership across the St. Louis region,
You're quite
and
welcome.
especially from the commission. Thank you for your years of service and dedication. Commissioners, any questions for Gary?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll echo Commissioner Eckelkamp's comments about your years of service and dedication. The urban office, we opened up here a couple of years ago, if I remember right. How's that going, or good programs?
Still have a lot of staff housed at the urban office. We are having some local visitors come to the urban office. It's still up and running. We're staffing the office, and I think it's a huge success.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of your earlier slides, you mentioned 10 cooperative agreements.
Yes,
Can you give me a couple examples of that?
sure. You back up.
I know you have a whole long list of partners, which is great.
Yes.
I don't think you have, well, anyway, just give me an example of a cooperative agreement.
Well, some of our cooperative agreements are with cities and communities, such as right now, Flam City Access is an example. We have a cooperative agreement with Flam City Access. We have several other cooperative agreements for our CAP program. So there's a number of them. New Haven City, we have a access there. So we have several cooperative agreements in addition to Sioux Passage Park. We have access that is on the Missouri River for a boat ramp. So, yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, thank you, Gary, so very much. Commissioners, next I will draw your attention to the consent calendar, and I will entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
A second? Thank you, Steve. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next up, we will hear from Deputy Director Laura Conley. Welcome, Laura.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Sumners. You may recall that during the September Commission meeting, the Commission voted to approve recommendations from the mid-year code review of the Wildlife Code related to 2 community assistance program area changes, the opening of Rock Lake Conservation Area in Kirksville, the removal of Columbia Bottom Conservation Area as an intensively managed wetland, the spelling of Cedar Grove as 2 words instead of 1, a slight modification to the verbiage of the administrator for the approved chronic wasting disease certification program requirement, and opening fishing to the public on Caldwell Memorial Conservation Area to catch and release. An additional 6 proposed amendments, which would establish a framework for an antlerless elk hunting opportunity and update restrictions on the use of dogs, were also given approval. Following the Commission's initial consideration, these rulemakings were filed with the Secretary of State's office, and all but 1 were published in the Missouri Register, which initiated a 30-day public comment period. The Secretary of State failed to publish 3 CSR 10-12.130 fishing general provisions and seasons, and this rulemaking will be published in the January 2nd, 2025 issue of the Missouri Register, followed by a 30-day public comment period. The final order of rulemaking is anticipated to be presented for the Commission consideration at your February 7th Commission meeting. For the other 15 proposals, a summary of the 3 comments received along with staff responses are included as final orders of rulemaking provided in your Commission packet. This presentation of orders of rulemaking as formal Commission action items signifies the final step in the Department's regulations process. The Commission has the authority to adopt as originally written, amend, or withdraw the proposed regulations. If approved today, these changes will be effective February 28th, 2025. Madam Chair, unless the Commission has any questions or concerns, I request approval for these 15 final orders of rulemaking with no changes to the original recommendations.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? Microphone, Steve.
I just have a generic question, and I've asked this before, but I still wanted clarification. On our antlerless elk season that we're implementing, I think the current population was 320 elk, is that correct?
I think it's, yeah, in that neighborhood, yes.
And when we had originally introduced those, we were having a target population of, I think, 1,100. Is that what our target population was, or?
So it's 500, and so, and that's a cap, that's where we would like the population to stay.
Okay. I just, those animals introduced 2011, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I know we have some older females that are, but it's hard to differentiate when you do an antlerless season. And if you could say, we're only going to take these animals, but I mean, being a cattle producer, I've I've never reduced my female population when I was still wanting to increase my population, and I still have a difficult time getting my head around that. I don't know, just for public comments, could you comment on that? I know it's probably a better question for Aaron, but I still
Yeah,
would like to hear it again.
Yep, no, I'll do my best to address that. And so really, I think what we're looking at is, one, this establishes the framework. And so they're in the process of doing their surveys. A quota recommendation, if we were to issue permits, would come to the commission at their April meeting. So this is kind of the first step in setting up that antlerless season, or the opportunity for an antlerless season. With respect to the way the population is growing and not being at that 500 level prior to introducing, the staff really looked at the models that we had, the growth rates, and recognized that we could still continue to grow the population even with introducing what in all likelihood could be a minimal antlerless harvest. And so that, I think, is where they are at now, rather than waiting until we hit that 500 cap on the population, or maximum of the population, and then going through the rulemaking process, which in and of itself can take upwards of a year before we would have a season in place.
Well, you know, I guess the reason it get my attention, I think like average production rate on elk is around 0.7 calves per cow. And if you look at, I think we put in about 70 cows initially on the initial stocking. If you look at that over 13 years, and we only have 320, the production rate is not even close to what you would anticipate it. I mean, it should be about 3,000 animals, really. You know, so I mean, there's some other factors comes into play in the productivity of those animals.
Yeah, there certainly are. And we knew with the reintroduction area, it is not what would we consider prime habitat. We do a lot of habitat manipulation in that area to provide open space for those animals, recognizing, though, that that area was targeted because it was a localized area that had a large interspersion of public land where those elk could stay without moving through other parts of the state. The other part of it is we do have brainworm challenges, so we do experience mortality related to brainworm. And so this is something that our team is actively looking at. And so when we look at the elk population, they are looking at it as a whole. So the growth of the population, hunting opportunities, how those elk are utilizing the landscape, and then all of those other factors that could also impact the growth of a population.
You know, and I appreciate that, Laura. I think it'd be really nice for the commission to just see a presentation on what's influencing the population dynamics there,
Yep.
because it's not, it doesn't match on what you would anticipate. And I know that meningeal worm is, you know, is a factor and comes into play there, but, you know, there's other states, you know, like, you know, Kentucky, you know, is assuming they have some of the same issues, but haven't had the same population dynamics. And it's just, the numbers don't match. It's just very interesting, and it'd be nice to see what the research really is showing.
Yep, we could absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, as always. I have just a quick question, and I probably should recall this, but I don't. On page 1 of your, or maybe page 4 of your report, your memo to Director Summers, action items, Reg 3 CSR 10-114.86 waterfowl hunting. What is that?
So that was the adjustments to Columbia Bottom as no longer being an intensively managed wetland.
Okay.
So it's changing it so that that area is under statewide regulations. I
Okay,
believe.
that has nothing to do with what the seasons or any establishment, that whole process. Okay, you shook your head. It has nothing to do with the establishment of seasons and all of this entire process, which is
Correct.
before us.
Correct, yep, that's a separate process.
I knew that, I just couldn't quite recall as I saw it. Thank you.
All right. Well, yes. Folks, regarding the motion, any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Laura.
you. The Regulations Committee met on October 31st to review recommendations to establish season dates for each portion of the 2025-2026 firearms deer hunting season, modify cervid carcass transport regulations, and establish cervid carcass disposal regulations. The committee also reviewed recommendations to establish season dates and limits, hunting regulations on conservation areas, and managed hunts for the 2025 turkey hunting season. Madam Chair, at this time, I'd like to invite Cervid Program Supervisor Jason Isabel to the podium to present the recommendations related to deer. Cervid Program Supervisor Jason Isabel holds a bachelor's degree in environmental and forest biology from the State University of New York and a master's degree in forestry and wildlife management from Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas. In 2010, Jason joined the department as our state's turkey and ruffed grouse biologist. During spring of 2019, Jason was promoted to his current role as Cervid Program Supervisor, where he oversees management of Missouri's deer and elk. Jason, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, members of the commission. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Start my presentation this morning with some acknowledgments. My team, Aaron Hildreth and Ashley McCullough, I also want to say a big thank you to Deb Hudman, our Wildlife Health Program Supervisor, and her staff, and members of the agency's Whitetail Deer Working Group. So as your commissioners, typically I'll come in front of you in May to present the deer packet. This year coming in front of you in December because some of the recommendations for the 2025 deer season are proposed amendments, which take a little bit longer, of course, to work through the regulatory process, but also here to present the season dates for the 2025 deer season so that hunters can get them on their calendars and plan for their annual leave ahead of time. So, outline of what I'm going to cover this morning. I have 3 recommendations for the 2025 deer season. Also mention some additional deer season considerations and some stakeholder engagement that has been ongoing in 2024 and that will continue into 2025, mostly related to the revision of our 10-year deer management plan. The recommendations I'll be presenting this morning to establish, as I mentioned, the dates of the firearms deer season for next year, a recommendation to rescind the interstate carcass transportation regulations, and lastly, a recommendation to establish carcass disposal regulations. So on the screen, you see the proposed dates for the 2025-2026 firearms deer season. These are established by formula, and they do not deviate from the formula that's been used in previous years. So new last year, the early antlerless portion of firearms deer season, the proposed dates of the 10th through the 12th of October. Early youth portion, November 1st and 2nd. Our most popular season, the November portion, the 15th through the 25th of November. Our CWD portion, which again is a 5-day period right on the tail end of our November portion in management zone counties. Dates of the 26th through the 30th of November. The late youth portion, the 28th through the 30th of November. The late antlerless portion, the 6th through the 14th of December. And then lastly, the alternative methods portion, 27 December to January 6, 2026. Shifting a little bit to talk about chronic wasting disease, certainly one of the greatest conservation challenges that we face, certainly has the potential to have very significant impacts, not only on the state's deer population, but our hunting culture and economy as well. We know there's several different modes of transmission for the disease, certainly direct deer-to-deer contact, deer encountering the infectious agent in the environment after it's been shed by an infectious deer. In utero transmission is possible, and we also know that deer can contract the disease by encountering infected carcasses on the landscape. And so we know that improper disposal of cervid carcasses certainly poses a very significant threat to introducing the disease to new areas of the state. Back in 2019, we established carcass transportation regulations to minimize the chances of CWD being introduced to different areas of the state. The regulations that we currently have in place apply for counties that are in our CWD management zone. The current regulations allow no high-risk parts to be moved out of the county of harvest. But there are several exceptions to that regulation. So hunters can deliver the carcass of a deer to any processor in the state as long as it's done within 48 hours. They can also deliver a deer's head to a licensed taxidermist anywhere in the state within 48 hours. They can also deliver a head to a CWD sampling station within 48 hours. So what this regulation does that we currently have on the books essentially is if you're taking your deer to a processor or a taxidermist or a sampling station and delivering it, you have to do so within 48 hours. It can be done anywhere in the state. But if you process your own deer and you hunt in the management zone and live in a different county than where you hunt, you essentially have to debone or quarter your deer prior to exiting the county of harvest. There are some challenges associated with the current interstate carcass transportation regulations. Certainly, the expansion of the management zone translates into it affecting more hunters. And so we've seen that through time. Also, regulatory complexity associated with the regulation that, at least anecdotally, has suggested it can be confusing to some of our hunters. When the regulation was put in place, certainly the exceptions to take carcasses to processors and heads to taxidermists and sampling stations certainly minimize the impact on those hunters and certainly on those businesses, but by having those exceptions, it does create that additional layer of regulatory complexity, which can cause confusion among hunters. And also, the central issue here that we're really concerned about is not necessarily the transportation of the carcasses, but what ultimately ends up with the carcass. So really the primary issue here is the disposal of the carcasses themselves. So given those challenges, we recommend rescinding the interstate carcass transportation regulations. And our third recommendation is to establish carcass disposal regulations. And so what we're proposing this morning is to allow hunters throughout the state to harvest a deer and transport that deer to any final destination in the state to process the deer if they're doing it themselves, as long as the unused parts end up in a certified landfill transfer station. They could put it out with their local trash service, or the unused parts end up on the property where the deer was harvested. They could still, if they have their deer processed or want to take the head to a taxidermist, they could still do that. But for those that process their own deer, it would allow them to transport the deer, for example, back to their house to be able to process the deer as they normally would, as long as I mentioned, those unused parts end up on the harvest property or in a certified landfill or transfer station. Our recommendation is to implement that regulation statewide rather than restricting it only to management zone counties. So currently, the interstate carcass transport regs only apply to the management zone. Our recommendation recommendation this morning would be to apply that to all 114 counties of the state. A couple of reasons for that. One, certainly it simplifies our messaging rather than having a regulation that's tied to the zone. And if the zone changes, of course, hunters are incrementally impacted by the change. If it's implemented statewide, the messaging is uniform across the state, which is certainly more simple. Another advantage is it can be seen as a proactive step to minimize the spread of CWD across the state. We also recommend, from an enforcement standpoint, to require hunters to have to telecheck their deer prior to leaving the harvest county. The current regulations in a non-management zone county is it has to be, or in a management zone county, if they're not leaving the county, they have to telecheck their deer by 10 p.m. on the day they take the deer. If they're in the management zone or the current system, they have to telecheck their deer if they leave the harvest county prior to 10 p.m. So our recommendation with this regulation would be to standardize it across the state. If hunters are leaving the harvest county with their deer, they would be required to telecheck their deer prior to leaving the harvest county. So it would essentially be the same requirement as currently in place in our CWD management zone. So I see several advantages to establishing carcass disposal regulations and rescinding our interstate carcass transportation regulations. One, as I alluded to earlier, it certainly simplifies the regulations. In my opinion, certainly makes it easier for hunters to understand, which certainly can positively impact compliance with the regulations. It allows hunters much greater flexibility in how they move and process their deer. So as I mentioned previously, for those that take their deer to a processor, they would continue to be able to do so. For those that hunt in a different county than where they live and process their own deer, will allow them to take their carcass back to where they would normally have processed the carcass. And this is particularly important, I think, as we talk about an aging hunter population, or if they harvest a deer just before dark, or if it's raining or snowy, inclement weather, they're not having to quarter or debone their deer in those type of conditions prior to transporting it back to their house. I also think it allows us more effective messaging about what the real issue here is, which is proper carcass disposal. So certainly that would be an advantage of this proposed change. And ultimately what we're talking about here is minimizing the spread of CWD to protect our deer herd. At this point in time, we would recommend no changes to our interstate carcass transport regulations or the regulations that pertain to folks that harvest service outside of Missouri's boundaries. Those regulations, as a reminder, prohibit high-risk parts from entering the state, with the exception of hunters can bring back in a head as long as it's got the cape attached and no more than 6 inches of neck, as long as they take it to a licensed taxidermist within 48 hours. Our reason for this is that of course, we know we have high CWD prevalence rates in a lot of neighboring states and those that don't even touch Missouri's borders. We know that the most common animal that hunters are pursuing as they travel out of state is a mature male, which have the highest CWD prevalence rates. All right, shifting gears again, talk about some additional deer season considerations. So as you're aware, commissioners, we're just putting the finishing touches on our 10-year deer management plan, wrapping that up. We've also seen the distribution of CWD change in our state in the last, particularly in the last couple of years. So with both of those occurrences, wrapping up the management plan, anxious to get that information out to members of the public, we certainly have an opportunity to explore some changes to future deer hunting regulations that would help us to meet the goals that we've established in our deer management plan. A couple of those in particular to help minimize the spread of CWD, but also to provide satisfactory hunting opportunities for our constituents and try to regulations that, of course, allow us to manage the population the way we need to, provide the type of opportunities our stakeholders want, and try to minimize as much regulatory complexity as we possibly can to increase the understanding of those regulations. And so we've been in active conversations about some of the considerations for hunting seasons and regulations in future years. We'll be coming back in front of you commissioners in May of 2025 with the rest of the recommendations for the 2025 deer season. So there would be action items, of course, associated with those items for 25, but also at that time presenting regulatory considerations for the 2026 deer season, but those would not be action items during the May 2025 commission meeting. And then I'll end just touching on some stakeholder engagement. Obviously, with the revision of the deer plan and some of the changes we're seeing on our landscape, it's an important time to keep our stakeholders engaged with our deer management approach. And so we've been actively engaged by providing some information to the public here in the last several months, particularly about our CWD management approach and the regulations that we have to slow the spread and protect our deer herd. And that'll continue into 2025 as we get information out there about the management plan, but also try to build awareness and build more awareness and more understanding of our CWD-based regulations and management approach. And also create awareness of the regulations considerations that I alluded to earlier in the presentation. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. I'll start with a specific, and then I might go a little bit more general, okay? And I'm sure you're not ready for any questions about deer management from this commission this morning. So specifically, would you agree that we have the best CWD surveillance data across the country, thanks to our staff and the investments we've made there very early on?
I would say in the vast majority of years, there are occasionally been 1 or 2 years in the last year or two where another state has had more samples tested than Missouri. But with those rare exceptions, we test more deer for CWD than any state in the nation.
And we appreciate all the staff time, especially overtime as we track the spread of the disease. Specific to the carcass disposal regulations, what do we know as far as how carcass transport has affected our spread of CWD across the state?
We know from research that an improperly disposed of carcass, or a carcass that sits on the landscape from a positive deer as it decomposes and other deer encounter it in the area where it was, certainly is a way CWD can spread. And so that's the motivation for our carcass transport regulations, is to try to minimize the number of infected deer that are moved across the state. So that was the justification for the original regulations. It's still the motivation that we have to minimize the inadvertent spread of CWD. And I think, in a lot of cases, if hunters aren't aware of the regulations, it's an easy way for them to inadvertently spread the disease around the state. And so I know I'm probably deviating a little bit from your question, Commissioner, but I'll say that in terms of the disposal versus transport, they both work towards that same goal for us to minimize the spread. And I think in terms of the disposal versus the transportation, it just makes it simpler. And I think it's very intuitive for our hunters. I think they would understand the risk of disposal. And I think with the proposed change that we have today, I think it's intuitive for those hunters, and I think they would understand it very easily and comply with the regulation. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about how deer management and CWD management have become pretty much the same thing for us here in Missouri. We have 425,000 deer hunters. I bring this up every time we talk about deer. I live in Franklin County, #1 deer harvest county in the state. We've also been a CWD county for a very long time. So culturally, when I live in my life, I deal with deer hunters and talk to deer hunters and live with deer hunters that have understood CWD regulations for a very long time. As we add new counties, as the director said, we've got 3 new counties with positives this year. The commission has had robust conversations with you and other professionals across the department about how this deer management has really become CWD management. And in those discussions, sometimes there's been concern of what regulations are to come. So today, what can you share as far as how we're engaging stakeholders and maybe how we are reducing that potential cultural shock as counties get entered into CWD management?
Sure. So I think with the expansion of the zone, of course, we have a suite of regulations that are unique to the zone that are not applied outside the zone. So anytime there's a change in the zone and counties are brought in, we have those new regulations that come in that hunters have to be aware of. And so as the zone has expanded over time incrementally, annually requires some hunters in some counties of the state where the expansion occurs to be aware of those new regulations. So it certainly adds complexity. That's undeniable. But I'll say moving forward in terms of some of the considerations and stakeholder engagement, recognizing the size of the zone is growing, recognizing that given the distribution of the disease, in some cases you end up with islands of 1 or 2 counties that are not in the zone surrounded by zone counties, and there's certainly some complexity associated with that. So I think in terms of the considerations is trying to look for ways that we can still achieve our deer management goals, but try to simplify things as much as we can, recognizing that those regulations do complicate things. And plans for 2025 would be to be very active in engaging members of the public in terms of what those, once the considerations are shared with the public, what those are, why we feel they're necessary, and then make sure we have active dialogue with them as we evaluate those considerations and see what kind of support that we would get for the public. But the eye is on being able to achieve our deer management goals, being able to minimize the spread of CWD as much as we can, but also trying to make things as simple as possible from a regulation standpoint within reason.
Commissioners, any questions for Jason?
Madam Chair?
Sure.
I have a couple of questions. Jason, thank you for your presentation as always. Complex topic, and you have a lot to present and toggle the different perspectives and so on. You do that well. On page, I don't know, proposed firearm deer season, page 237 of my packet, you had recommendations for the 25-26 season. Are we going to vote on that today? So maybe I didn't inquire earlier enough, but how, if I can ask from a process, how are these dates established? What kind of data goes into those? This deer season, I heard a fair amount about the underperformance of hunters, the underwhelming of harvested deers, attributed to everything from very warm early days to not coordinated properly with the rut, to too many acorns falling out of the trees, and they were comfortable just sitting under a tree rather than roaming through a field to nibble on a bush. So how does that all play into this? And is it possible that the department by special order could whimsically choose to add time to these dates, or are they set by federal law? If we decide the 15th was too early and it really, we should have started the 20th and gone to the 30th of November, is something that can be done or ever has been done? Or are these set in granite once we make this vote today?
Yeah, so the final vote for the dates will come at the May meeting with the rest of the deer packet, and then those are effective on July 1. So they're effective, a couple months before the deer season starts. In terms of how we come up with the dates, they're set by formula. So the November portions, typically, we've got a number of portions of farm's deer season, but based on where Thanksgiving ends up on the calendar, November's portion is going to start 2 Saturdays before that. And then based on that, we have a formula in place for the other portions in terms of where they sit in relation to the November portion. In terms of the season dates, a lot of that's driven honestly by hunter input and what types of opportunity they want. We have, with primary farm season occurring in and around the peak of the rut, it's certainly an exciting time to be in the woods. And so we have our archery hunters that typically want to spend as much time in early to mid-November archery hunting during that great time of year, but we also have a lot of firearms hunters that like to be in the woods at the same time. And so one of the things that I think is nice about our November portion is it's got a sliding scale. So like last year, it was as early as it could have been, which gave our firearms hunters an earlier chance to be in the woods during the rut, shorter time for the archery hunters.
During the hot time of the season, too, I might add.
Yeah, so then this year it shifted back to the 16th, so that gave our bow hunters almost another whole week to hunt. Firearms hunters were a little later. The proposed dates for 2025 would be the 15th, and it's going to go earlier until it shifts. So I think that does a nice job for both of those groups of hunters that we have to give each of them an opportunity at different times of the year. Yeah, this year's been a struggle for a lot of hunters. Whenever we see the calendar shift and the November portion goes back a week, you're a week later than the peak of the rut. The deer are not moving generally. Weather's a factor, of course. They're not moving as much as they would, all things considered, if it was a week earlier. When that happens, our archery hunters are really happy about it, and some of our firearm hunters are not so happy about it. But again, I think when we look at the survey data in terms of timing preference, most of our firearms hunters are really satisfied with where it is. But by having that sliding scale, it does give the archers, like this year, that extra week. So I think it's striking a little bit of a balance. But we'll routinely ask on our deer hunter surveys about timing of the portions. Not only timing, but how many portions, and we base them largely off of what hunters said. So a couple of years ago, last year was the first year we had the CWD portion, for example, in the early antlerless. Before we brought those recommendations to the commission, we'd ask that question on a survey to see what kind of support there was, and we had a lot more support than opposition. So that's an example of how we use the hunter surveys to help develop seasons that our hunters want. In terms of this season, so the calendar shifted back. There's a lot of acorns. We know whenever that happens, there's food everywhere in the woods, and the deer aren't coming to food plots, open fields as much. And even within the timber, they're not moving as much because they can get up out of their bed and just start eating. So whenever we see a big acorn crop, particularly down in the Ozarks, of course, we see a good acorn crop, we see a big drop in harvest. And if you look this year at the harvest comparison from this year to last year at the county basis, counties in a lot of North Missouri, Central, and then West Central and Southwest aren't really lagging that far behind 2023. But if you look at like the heart of the Ozarks, that's where harvest is really down, which makes sense based on the acorn crop. And it's been a mild fall, so it's kind of been a little bit of a perfect storm in terms of multiple factors working against the hunters this year.
Okay, so these are going to be voted upon today. Again, I guess published, and then we'll come back in May, and in that interim, I guess they'll be available for comment or input from the public, more surveys, more establishments, so they're not written in granite. The other question comes up, and I could have mentioned it with the other group, the duck season splits and the timing and the overlap. I think there was not a split in the northern zone, but a split in the southern, central zone, and the opening of deer season, I think historically, I feel, at least anecdotally, has been timed with that split. Is there anything and any coordination, anything there to talk about?
Yeah, we definitely look across programs. So we've got the deer season, we've got fall turkey season, and waterfowl, and elk and bear. So there's a lot, small game. There's a lot of seasons that occur during the fall. And I will say we do talk amongst programs to look at what the dates are and try to minimize that as much as we can, recognizing that there's a lot of opportunity there. And, we'll never have a system where there won't be some overlap, but we try to be conscious to make sure if we have a couple significant periods that if we can avoid them occurring on the same time frame, then we try to do that.
Thank you.
Steve?
I'm sure you didn't anticipate I had any questions or anything, Jason. Is that okay? Can you hear me okay? Just for amusement purposes, I asked Jason about what time we thought we'd fit today, and he said, I don't know. I don't have any idea, Steve. What do you think? I said, we only have turkeys, deer, insurance. Seriously, okay. But anyway, actually, I do have several questions, and one question, I know Jason had sent us some information, said, if we had any comments on the 10-year deer plan, we're going to be working on finalizing that. And I guess just for my own information, the 10-year deer plan, but like our season setting and stuff that we're going to be voting on in May, are they coincident with one another, or is it two separate entities, and what's the time frame for us to give input and interact with you on that, Jason?
So our goal is to have the deer plan done next month. So that'll happen much sooner than when we would be meeting in May for the rest of the deer packet to come.
Okay. Okay. One comment that I would have, is I think we're voting on today, this carcass discussion is a challenging discussion. And the reason that I say that, there's actually 2 or 3 comments that I hope you're taking into consideration. Some of the dose levels necessary for infection haven't really been established. That RTQA, testing thing is available and that sort of thing. So you're hypothetically saying that these carcasses, can be a potential source, which probably is valid, just because when we look at continued pop-ups and that sort of thing. So I'm supportive of that, and I appreciate, how you're looking at it. I think we're probably setting up something that's not going to be enforceable, quite frankly, because when I read the reg, it said, okay, we're simplifying it because you don't have to debone the animal before you take it from the carcass. You can take it home. If an individual is doing a deer at home and debones it and takes care of the meat, they're probably not going to be looking for a landfill, and I'd be challenged to find out a landfill that I could put it in. So I think it's going to be a challenge from an enforcement standpoint, and I think we've got to decide how far we want to push it. That's a consideration. I appreciate the input. It's better than what it was, but I don't have an answer. But one of the things of interest from a carcass standpoint movement, during our traditional hunting, most people are hunting at home. Maybe there's a few people that are traveling here, there, and yonder. But the question that I posed to Jason on that was on our special hunts, that are specifically in known CWD management areas. I think there's about 60 of those. And the majority of those people are probably traveling significant throughout the state. And so those carcasses are really getting redistributed. And so a different level of special consideration for those carcasses probably should be thought about on that, because those are known entities. That's a different deal, and probably 90% of those hunters are traveling significantly throughout the state. So those animals, although the numbers may not be very high, they're also risk population. So I think we need to talk about that. Another thing, and this is a challenging topic, and I don't want to get into the details of it, but on our CWD management, and specifically in our targeted removal things, and I asked Jason, he thinks he sends me articles to amuse me, and then I try my best to read them. And Majerovic, that Mary Beth Majerovic, she identified how much conflict there can potentially be in those targeted removal projects. And, at your convenience, if you could share with the commission some of the guidelines that we're utilizing in doing those, because, the potential impact on landowners. And I'll just give you one example where I see there's a conflict is, I think we're doing target culling on as little as 5 acres of 5 acres of land. But we went to great lengths to say that a landowner couldn't even qualify for a free permit unless they had 20 acres, you know, and that's a really mixed message to the public, you know, when we're doing that. And we need to have really strict guidelines, and I hope in those guidelines, we're really not only considering of the goal of it, but the impact that it has on the adjacent landowner. Because the adjacent landowners that have dedicated their life for deer management are some of the biggest supporters of the conservation department. Whereas the people that may allow that to occur probably don't even like deer. And so that's a concern. The other thing on that, and I may have misunderstanding, but I believe there's some financial compensation for those deer that are harvested. I think it's directed towards processing, but then there's kind of a dual thing. And one of the posts that I read on the Missouri deer hunters, you know, one of the beefs with the department was we were paying $75 per animal harvested. And I'd like to know more about the details of that because, you know, to put value to harvest the animal, if that is what's being perceived by the public, that's not good for MDC. And I'm real concerned about that. I think there's a $75 plus $20 processing, but it's the $75 paid directly to the landowner. But it's a message that we need to make sure it's identified properly. The last thing, and I just wanted to kind of touch on what Ray was saying on season dates. You know, right now we had 3 more new counties pop up, you know, on the CWD. And when you start looking at the 25-mile radius, that's probably going to include 4 or 5 counties now, if I was going to guess. That's what happened in my county, Phelps County. The policy wasn't in Phelps, it was in Marys, but it extended over, so they included it. So we were at 69, so we're probably going to be at 72 or 74 counties. And a comment or a thought on these season dates. So we have extended CWD season, but we actually got another problem with our deer harvest. It's just basically deer harvest, you know, total number of animals. And it's something you and I have discussed. Well, as we see declining hunter numbers and then we see declining deer harvest, you know, maybe since we've gotten to such a high number that it's time to say, okay, we're going to extend the season by a week, and it's just going to be so we don't end up with an enforcement management thing throughout the state because we're so far into that. Just, you know, comment. And then the only last thing I'd add is, you know, we have the alternative weapon season coming up. And, you know, I mean, like our harvest, our survey data, it showed 50% of the people in northern Missouri are wanting to harvest, you know, antlered bucks, and you know me, I am obviously, and I've already had 2 of my mature bucks shed, and you know we're in the middle of February. Moving that and not starting that season until the 27th or the last weekend after Christmas, you know, it's moving out where there's going to be a lot of shed antler bucks harvested that maybe landowners may not have wanted, and maybe we need to consider making that a 2-week season or moving it out a week. I don't know. It's things that I'd like for you to look at and consider, Jason, on those things. But, and I do appreciate the challenges you have in this. If I had the answers like when we had dinner the other night, I mean, but just thoughts, you know, from the standpoint. I know you live with it every day, and I appreciate that. But the public has some real concerns of how this keeps getting more complicated and the manpower we're, you know, dedicating to it and that sort of thing. So anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I jotted down a few notes, Commissioner. I'll respond to some of those. In terms of the research with infected carcasses, there actually have been some research project where they took an infected carcass, set it on the landscape, let it sit there for a period of time, and then brought in additional deer, and those deer ended up positive. So I think we can say with confidence from research that in terms of the infectious dose, like a decomposing carcass on the landscape certainly can have that high enough infectious dose to spread the disease.
And, you know, I'll just comment on it. I agree with you 100%, just so you know. Mike Hubbard and I way back when we had had discussions on it, because, you know, at one time, we were gonna blame all the captive service places for any CWD. You know, that was a discussion back in early 2000. And, you know, fortunately, we haven't had a positive CWD in a captive facility since 2011, but we keep seeing this distribution. And the only logical way that you can influence that is carcass redistribution. That's the reason I focused on those 60 areas in there. So I'm supportive of that. It's just, you make a positive move in it. I just don't know. I'm glad it's your problem, so to speak. I mean, because I don't have an answer for you. I just can pose some things that we're putting challenges is the issue on it, Jason. And I mean that quite sincerely.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I think in terms of messaging, you know, it'll be up to us to communicate effectively about that. And I think for the average hunter that processes their own deer, it's not as if they have to seek out a landfill and take the carcass there. I mean, if they break it down and they're processing their own deer and double bag it and put it out with their trash. So it doesn't have to be a big inconvenience for them. A lot of them do that, you know, now. And if the pieces are small enough, they can certainly just put it out with their trash. So we're certainly not requiring them to seek out and travel any sort of long distance to do that. So I think that'll be a big advantage for them in terms of simplicity and also getting the carcass parts to be disposed of in a proper way.
You know, kind of a comment there, just a thought, but as we're educating our hunters, to make them be proactive trying to help us and write some explanation in the regulation, you know, them understand, rather than saying this is the reg and this is what you have to do, say, you know, give a little bit of an explanation that might be helpful for them. So then they're motivated to help rather than being forced to do something.
Agree completely. The other thing I'll touch on that you mentioned, Commissioner, in terms of the reimbursement. So the reimbursement is, you know, is not, the reimbursement that you're referencing to is associated with our CWD management permits that are for use during the regular hunting season. So if anybody has land in a CWD core area, it's a qualifying land where they have enough land in the core area, they can get issued 10 CWD management permits for use during the deer hunting season, so totally separate from targeted removal. They harvest the deer using those management permits, and they submit ahead for CWD testing. So that as a requirement, then we will issue them a up to $75 reimbursement for processing, but only if it was harvested on a management permit, and only if they provided a sample for us for testing.
The challenge of the public perception is basically that's perceived by many as putting a bounty on the animal. Just like when I used to get $5 for a coyote ears. And that's, you know, to put a bounty on a deer, that strikes me not so good. And there's a concern there. I mean, I appreciate what the intent is, but I want you to appreciate how the public can perceive it from a different perspective. Because it's almost it's a bounty on deer. And a landowner, a farmer, and I have a lot of my friends that are farmers that entirely make their living off the land. They have really very little motivation to take care of deer. The more deer removed, the happier they are. And so it's a very challenging path, you know, on that. And that is concerning to me. And just a different opinion. I just want you to hear that.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's a messaging challenge for us too, to make sure that we get the word out there and what the specifics of that regulation is, those permits and what it entails.
I mean, the permit, being able to have the opportunity to harvest a deer, it's an opportunity to harvest a deer. But when you tag the $75 on top of it, that's a different message.
And I think sometimes too, some folks don't recognize that that is tied to submission of the sample too. So it's not an across the board payment. It's only for folks that submit the samples. But I understand what you're saying.
There's so much abuse. I mean, you know, whenever we talked about, you know, South Dakota, they have a tail, you know, for predators, you know, for raccoons and that sort of thing. And you can just stop along the side of the road and cut off head and get $75. You know, so you got all kinds of potential challenges with that. But anyway, that's just, leave it alone. We can talk about it more. I just want you to think about it.
No, I understand that. Thank you, Commissioner. The last thing I'll mention is in terms of regulatory simplicity. So, yeah, I certainly understand the challenges of the expanding zone and what it means for the CWD portion in different counties. And so my comment to Commissioner Eckelkamp about simplicity, those are some of the things that we're considering in terms of the complexity of our regulations and trying to make it easier on hunters. And in terms of the alternative methods season, I do get that comment from folks that wonder why it's that late. What we've done historically with that season is, at least for the last almost 10 years or so, tried to stagger it in most years so that it overlaps that Christmas, New Year's time when people have off from work or kids have off from school. The challenge when it gets really late, of course, is, the weather can get colder then, and then you do run into some cases where bucks have already dropped their antlers. So it's one of the things we periodically ask hunters on surveys in terms of timing. It'd probably be good to revisit that again.
Thanks.
Just a couple tag-ons to questions from Ray and Steve. And you mentioned, of course, in your recommendation 3 about carcass disposal. And you mentioned that you put it out in trash. And you indicated a certified landfill. What constitutes a certified landfill?
Just be one that would be permitted. So it'd have to be an official permitted landfill.
So if it's picked up by a governmental agency, most likely it's going to be a certified landfill.
Yeah, they could put it out with their trash service and be just fine.
I do know that they discourage putting dead animals in the trash. Near, roadkill, raccoons and squirrels and things like that. I'm not sure if that's just a site-specific question in some cities or not, but if they're discouraging you to do that, do you think carcass disposal would be of concern at all?
So we have regulations in place right now for processors and taxidermists. So those businesses have to dispose of unreturned parts in the same verbiage, certified landfill or transfer station. So that regulation's on the books, and to my understanding, that has not caused issues. And there was extensive conversation with, in terms of the landfills and waste disposal prior to that regulation taking effect, and that regulation's been in place for about 5 years now. So I don't anticipate any issues. Also, the way I think of it too, by the time you get done processing a deer at home, when we think of a deer carcass, we think of just the entire deer sitting beside the road. But by the time you get done breaking it down and processing it yourself, you really end up with pieces that are, of course, much smaller that can be just put in the trash bag and put out with the regular trash.
It's a simpler, more,
It's
not as much. So.
correct.
And the only other comment, maybe it's kind of the way I might even answer your question. Ray asked earlier about these 7 different portions that he was discussing earlier. I see it from a perspective. I mean, you've got about a 11, 12-week time frame to do all of this. Is that correct? From early October to the first part of the year. So
Yes,
it's a balancing act, to get
Including
all
the archery, 4 months.
Yeah, you've got almost a little less than 3 months to do all that. So it's a balancing act to do that. So you really don't have much latitude to make shifts. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and so with the portions we have now, once you get into the early portion throughout the rest of the season, there isn't a lot of weekends that don't have a firearms portion of some sort. So it's not as if there's this extended period where things can be shifted around dramatically, but I do think there's some opportunities to simplify within the structure that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question that I neglected to ask a while ago, Jason. I had picked up some feedback about the processors, the public processors, and the requirements surrounding share of the harvest, perhaps, and processing in general, the segregation of deer meat from other processed animals, and just the burdensome of that imposed by the federal government, Department of Agriculture, and the state, and the timing, and many had anecdotally dropped out or were dropping out or changing what they would do. Have you picked up any more sense of that during the season? Is there any more relief? I know there are other NGOs and so on that are involved in this, but what more can we do there? Because I do get asked about it.
Sure.
I will get asked about it as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of processors that take deer, we've certainly seen, and it's not unique to Missouri, a drop in the number of those available through time, particularly after COVID with the price of beef and pork and the profit that can be made there. We've certainly seen some of them stay in the business but not take deer. So that is a concern long term for those hunters that have their deer processed. We know from surveys that 1 in 5 hunters goes to a processor exclusively. So that's a challenge. In terms of share the harvest, I do hear from hunters that would shoot more deer if they had one that was closer. So I think that's a really great program. It's a great service. I think, the distribution of the share the harvest processors in the state is certainly a challenge for some hunters in some parts of the state, just to not have to drive a long distance to be able to donate deer. And then there's some additional complications with processors that take deer from the management zone. So if a hunter harvests a deer in the management zone, they've got to have it tested prior to being donated, and that presents some challenges. There's some additional paperwork, but also the holding the meat until the test results.
The holding, the squeezing out other room in a freezer.
It's hard, yeah. So we've actually, it's an active conversation within our agency to try to look at, because I think, certainly from a convenience standpoint for hunters and the benefit of the folks that benefit from that venison's important, but also just looking long-term, as Commissioner Harrison mentioned, with the declining hunter numbers, increasing deer numbers, realizing we have to harvest a set number of deer to meet our management goals. Like share the harvest, I think moving forward will continue to be increasingly important for us to even achieve our deer management goals, to give folks an outlet for the venison, because we already have more permits than most hunters want to take advantage of in more days. So those don't seem to be living factors. It's what do I do with the additional deer? And so a very good point, and something that we're talking about.
Well, I would just encourage you and the team, the department, and some out here to continue to talk to the processors about this. I harvested 2 deer this season and donated them both to show the harvest, and I felt really good about that, because I know the program is incredible and it puts meat on the plates of people who might not otherwise have it, and it would be a shame if there weren't that many available processors. And so, anyhow, it's a great program. Thanks for what you're doing on it.
Commissioner, any other questions for Jason? Jason, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will see you soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Commissioners. As a reminder, final recommendations for regulations related to the 2025-2026 deer season will be submitted to the Commission next spring. However, establishing the season structure now does provide additional information for those who need to make early projections for annual leave. So those dates will be communicated out to the public. If approved, the 3 proposed amendments related to carcass transport and disposal will be filed with the Secretary of State's office for publication in the Missouri Register, which will initiate a formal 30-day comment period. Comments received on specific proposals will be compiled and presented as part of final orders of rulemaking for Commission consideration in spring of 2025. The rules, if approved by the Commission, would be effective prior to the start of the 2025-2026 deer season. Madam Chair, I request Commission approval of recommendations to establish season dates for each portion of the 2025-26 fall firearms deer season, approval of recommendations to modify cervid carcass transport regulations, and approval to establish cervid carcass disposal regulations as presented.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Any discussion? I think we did that. Laura's off the hook. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. The last set of action items relates to the 2025 spring and fall turkey seasons. Here today to provide these recommendations is scientist Nicholas Oakley. Nick has worked for the department since the summer of 2019. He currently serves as the wild turkey and rough grouse biologist, where he oversees several ongoing research projects and provides regulation recommendations. Nick holds a bachelor's degree in forestry and fisheries and wildlife biology from the University of Missouri and his master's degree from the University of Wyoming. Prior to joining the department, Nick spent several years in the western United States working on a wide variety of ecology and conservation projects. Nick, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Commission, it's good to be here. I've got a lot to cover, so I'll just jump right in. So what I'd like to cover today is just kind of give a real brief update on our turkey habitat initiative. And then I'm going to talk about the turkey population, some of the metrics and indexes that we follow and look at. And then I'll talk about our brood survey, some changes that I'd like to make with that. And then from there, talk about the regulation changes that we made last year and some of the information that we've got from it and maybe some lessons learned. And then I'll give recommendations at the end. So first and foremost, the Turkey Habitat Initiative. Big thanks to Megan Duffy Yates, our Turkey Habitat Initiative coordinator. Megan came on a 2-year term position, which is wrapping up here in the next couple of months. And I'm a little nervous to see how much work she's really been doing because it's a ton of work that'll hopefully she still has some input in. But we've done a lot with Turkey Habitat Initiative over the last year or so, including putting on a variety of workshops. The landowner workshops, we went out to private landowners' properties, had them communicate and participate fully, and we were able to invite other private landowners out to talk turkeys, right? How do I improve my property to get more turkeys on the landscape? I think those went really well. We also did 4 staff workshops where we went to our conservation areas. We invited our staff and our partners and some partner staff to come and kind of do a similar thing. It was a 2-day workshop where we really got into the nitty-gritty of the turkey biology and kind of what turkeys need on the landscape and how to go about getting it from an agency perspective. So I think those also went really well. We also have our habitat management guide. It's been in the editing on the editing table for a little while. We just got edits back, so that's really exciting. That'll come out here in the spring, and that'll be kind of like a paper form of a workshop, the why, how, and where to do turkey habitat management. So that's great. And then we also got a habitat management video series through a grant with our NWTF partners. It turned into about a 25-minute video broken into 4 segments that we're going to premiere at the state NWTF banquet. Really proud of it. It's really great. I think it's going to be a good communication tool with folks who are just interested in getting more turkey habitat on the ground. So Turkey Habitat Initiative is full steam ahead, and it's very exciting to be a part of. Okay, so how was the spring turkey season? So this was another good year. 2024, we harvested over 47,000 birds. That's a slight increase compared to last year. Again, 2024 was our highest harvest since all the way back in 2016, kind of before that dip that we saw most recently. And actually, if you zoom all the way back to 1998, harvest this year was right at that kind of long-term average, which is a good spot to be, right? Every year can't be above average, so I'm pretty happy with where things landed this year. Another thing I like to think about whenever I'm looking at harvest is what we call harvest per unit effort. So essentially, we scale harvest based on the number of trips hunters take. That long-term average, again, going back to 1998, was 80 birds per 1,000 trips, or a different way, it's 1 bird every 12 and a half trips. And so, of course, that includes folks who don't harvest a bird. Those get counted as well. And this year, we were at 79 birds per 1,000 trips, so again, right there at that long-term average. I like this figure because I think it draws some attention to the fact that certainly we saw some harvest decline, but even in 2004, which is about the level we saw last year in terms of harvest efficiency, we're right there at that level, which I think is an important thing. Certainly we hear a lot of comments that the turkey population is dwindling, declining. Some people tell me it's going extinct in Missouri. Based on, at least on harvest this year in the last couple of years, things are headed in the right direction. So I'm optimistic about that. We also like to know what hunters think, right? So I can look at the data, but it does matter what the hunters are seeing out there on the landscape. So we ask hunters what their opinion of the hunting season was: excellent, good, fair, or poor. This year, happily, over 50% of our hunters said that they had an excellent or good season, which is a good spot to be. Obviously, cause and effect, right? The folks who said they had a poor season was down below that 20% line, so that's about a 30 percentage point gap. Again, looking back to 2016, that's kind of the highest point we've been since 2016. So it seems as though we've kind of dug out of the hole, essentially, that poor production left us in for a few years there. So good news there. Happy to see that. The last thing we ask, not the last thing, one of the other things we ask our turkey hunters is whether the county that they hunt in, if the turkey population provides ample hunting opportunity. This is a sort of a sense for like, are you seeing a lot of turkeys? Are you seeing a lot of turkeys? And certainly we've seen declines there. It's kind of interesting. In 2012 and 2013, harvest was actually lower than it was this year. It was lower than it was in 2016. So to me, this seems like it's probably a bit of a lagging indicator. Folks need to sort of reassure themselves that things are going okay before they start to respond. That there are ample turkeys for good hunting opportunity. But again, we've been above that 50% threshold a couple years now. So and we're headed the right direction. So I'm happy to see that, certainly. As for the fall turkey season, the archery portion is ongoing. So I've got last year's numbers and then kind of an update on this year's numbers. So last year was actually a pretty good turkey hunting season in the fall. We had a 12% increase in our total firearms harvest and an 18% increase in our archery harvest. And overall, we saw about a 15% increase in harvest compared to that 5-year average. So that's good news. Nevertheless, of course, just to kind of put perspective, it's quite a bit fewer birds than we had harvested historically, down over 80% last year. Of course, I think this is mostly a participation component. This is not an indication that the turkey population has declined by that much or anything like that. I think these are hunters that have chosen to pursue deer or some other activity in the fall, not so much that we've seen a huge decline in turkey numbers, at least not to that percent. It is important also, I think, to note that harvest last year, a majority of it was archery harvest, which was one of the reasons why we recommended including or reformatting our turkey permits so that archery deer hunters don't get turkey permits, right, to kind of cut down on some of that opportunistic harvest. Because historically, over 50, well, at least since 2016, over 50% of the fall archery harvest was done, fall turkey harvest was done with archery equipment. So we wanted to address that. This year, the firearms portion has been completed. We shot about 1,800 birds, which is pretty cool. Sorry, which is pretty cool. How are we doing? Good. Sorry. Good. I get a little fact and figure heavy, so that was yeah. There you go. But yeah, so we're right around that 5-year average for the fall archery harvest. So it doesn't seem, fall firearms harvest. I need to slow down and speak better. So it doesn't seem as though the regulation change had a big impact on our firearms harvest, which is good because I think that's kind of the core fall turkey hunter. Our archery harvest is about 50% of what it was at this time last year. So again, I think the permit more or less targeted those opportunistic archery hunters, which was the goal. Well, of course, we'll need to wait until the end of the season to see how that regulation change impacted final numbers and participation numbers. But as of November 15th or 14th, we sold about 23,000 fall turkey permits, which whenever we compare it to deer or even spring turkey hunting is quite a bit smaller. But that's not a small number of people either. And I think that's worth keeping in mind that fall turkey hunting is not like a niche pursuit. It's smaller certainly than our other seasons, but that's still quite a few folks who enjoy doing a fall turkey hunt. As far as the brood survey, so this is data that you guys have seen. It's something that we're real proud of in the turkey program. We've had one of the longest, if not the longest, running brood surveys in the country. It's really, really important index for us to just sort of track the quality of the hatch. So that poult-to-hen ratio is essentially just a way of measuring hatch quality. And it's really valuable as an index, right? The number itself has value certainly, but only in comparison to other numbers in the past. It gives us a trend, essentially, as all indices do. However, the way we filter and edit the data, filter the data to get rid of like really erroneous, right? If you said you saw 1,000 poults in one hen, we'd cut that out because it's either data entry mistake or I don't know, maybe it's intentional, I'm not sure. But we would edit that anyway, right? So that's what I mean by data filtering. So the way we filter the data is unique to Missouri, and what that means is we can't compare our poult-to-hen ratio, which is what most people are interested in, across state lines. If Kentucky has a poult-to-hen ratio of 2.0, Missouri's got a poult-to-hen ratio of 2.5, we couldn't compare that historically. Now, luckily, the National Wild Turkey Federation's technical committee, which is made up of a bunch of state biologists, developed a standardized brood survey process, whereas all the states collect data the way they normally do, submit it to a kind of a centralized location, they do the analysis, and we get our information back. Jason Isabel had a large role to play in that. They published a paper that outlined all the factors and considerations of that. And the upshot here is that I think what's really valuable is we can now, if using that data, compare our poult-to-hen ratio and our other brood metrics or production metrics between states, right? So again, if Missouri has a poult-to-hen ratio of 2.5 and Kentucky has a poult-to-hen ratio of 2.0, we could be like, well, Missouri had better production this year, which is of limited value. But I think the good part is we'll be able to, on a map, see big regional similarities, right? if all the Mid-South had similar production. I think that's really more interesting than just being like, Missouri did better than Arkansas, which, I'm okay with too. But I think the value to me and to other turkey hunters is that it's going to be able to show regional trends, which, if nothing else, I think is worth making the change. So what does that mean in terms of something like our poult-to-hen ratio? So far, it seems as though the newer method, the standardized method, is gonna come back with a higher poult-to-hen ratio. One of the reasons is historically we've eliminated records that had more than 2 hens and poults, right? So if you saw 3 hens and 25 poults, we would remove that. The specifics aren't super important. The gist is the trends are going to be similar, right? And that lines up really pretty well here. Of course, it's not that much data yet, so we'll continue to track it. But I'm really optimistic that within a few years we're going to see that the trend lines really do match up really well, and it's already shown signs of that so far. So that's kind of the gist on the brood survey and why we're making the change. I think it gives us a better opportunity to look regionally as opposed to just specifically within Missouri. As far as the poult-to-hen or the brood survey went this year, production, it was a pretty mixed bag for Missouri in terms of production. The statewide poult-to-hen ratio was 1.95. Using the old method, that would have been 1.2. But you can see the Northeast had very, very good production. Parts of the Central Ozarks and the western half of the state had poorer production, at least compared to the Northeast and the Mississippi lowlands. Some of that probably had to do with weather. I know that the Southwest was a wetter year when I look at the deviation maps in terms of how much rainfall fell. So I suspect we flooded out some nests pretty early on, and then wet weather generally is poor. It indicates poor production because the poults will get wet and they succumb to that. But overall, production this year, I'd say, was pretty good. Better certainly than it has been in the recent past, last year notwithstanding. Okay, just sort of summarize that all. Harvest was up a little bit this year, so that's good news. I think production was better than it has been in recent years. Spotty around the state, so that's certainly something to be aware of, but pretty decent nevertheless. Harvest per unit effort was at that 20-year average, which is a good sign. And then our hunter satisfaction and perception are headed the right direction. So I think that's all, good news as we think about last season as a roundup. Okay, probably, well, maybe what everyone is most interested in, certainly what I was most excited about whenever I was building the presentation was what kind of impacts did we see from the regulation change that we made last year. You're going to see several of these figures, so I just want to orient you real quick. So the vertical or the horizontal axis is just the hour in which a bird was telechecked, and then the horizontal axis is the percentage of the harvest at that hour. So if you look at the blue line, that was harvest done in 2024. You can see the peak there was at about 15% at 7 a.m. So about 15% of the harvest across the season was telechecked at 7 a.m. So that's kind of what we're looking at there with these figures. The other line, the red line, is just several years of data before we made the regulation change as a comparison. So a couple of things stick out. Obviously, there's a second peak in harvest there in the afternoon, exactly what we would have expected. This is almost to the percentage point what Indiana saw whenever they did this a couple decades ago. So that's good to know that we sort of followed that trend. We also did see quite a few fewer birds telechecked during the mid part of the day, which again I don't think is surprising, as obviously those birds have to get harvested somewhere. It seems as though we've just redistributed that to later in the day, right? So it's not a lot of extra harvest; it's just a redistribution of the harvest. Overall, whenever we look at that longer term, going back pre-regulation, about 17% of our birds were telechecked after 1 p.m. The regulation says you just need to telecheck the bird the same day it was harvested before 10 p.m. So some of those birds, all of those birds obviously were harvested before 1 p.m. If they were legal. So about 17% of our hunters historically have telechecked the birds after that 1 p.m. mark. This year is about 27%. So I think it's really the difference between those lines, right? It's about 10%. I'd say ballpark 10% of our harvest was done after 1 p.m. based on that information, which again falls directly in line with what other states saw when they made similar changes. Some other things that I think are, of course, really important, and the justification, one of the primary justifications for this change was to increase participation and recruitment of new hunters, and you can see that kind of across the board we saw increases in that regard. Recruitment in particular, jumping 15% this year over last year is kind of almost surprising. Talking to our R3 coordinator, that number struck him as higher than expected, so that's great news. Certainly, it seems as though the regulation change had that effect. In regards to youth participation, we also saw large increase in youth participation, almost 10%, which is great news. And if you look at that figure, an even larger percentage of our youth harvest was done after 1 p.m., or at least the telecheck. But again, so instead of 27% of the harvest being telechecked after 1 p.m., with youths it was 33%. So that's great news. It seems, again, as though the regulation change did sort of target what we were hoping for. Another thing that certainly stuck out in the data is that our non-resident participation was increasing. Now, this is obviously was happening last year as well, before the regulation change. But when you look at those raw numbers, 26% non-resident participation might be a little shocking, I suppose. It definitely stuck out to me. But when we look at the raw numbers, that 26% is roughly 2,200 additional hunters. So grand scheme across the lands, across the state, that's still only about 8% of our total permit sales go to non-resident hunters. Other states I know that figure's approaching 50%, so certainly we're not anywhere near that. And some of it may be driven by our own regulation change, allowing all-day hunting on private land. Could be more interesting to a non-resident hunter, but certainly other state regulation changes are likely also impacting that. Kansas and Nebraska both restricted non-resident hunting, so it's possible we're seeing some spillover from that as well. And then I made this figure, which is maybe not very effective, but its lack of effect is probably what makes it a useful figure. It doesn't look like, even if you look back across the year, right, our non-resident participation is changing that much. Again, it looks like a big percentage change, but that's because it's a relatively small number of overall permits. Yeah, so everything I've been talking about so far has been harvest-based or telecheck-based, right? Did you shoot a bird after 1 p.m., et cetera, et cetera. What I did want to know was whether people were taking advantage of the regulation change. And so we asked the question, did you hunt only before 1 p.m., after 1 p.m., or both? And I condensed that a little bit to, did you hunt only before 1 p.m., or did you ever hunt after 1 p.m.? And it looks like about 2/3 of our hunters still only ever hunted before 1 p.m. So it's still very much in Missouri a morning-only hunt. The majority of our hunters still do not take advantage of the regulation. But on the other hand, 1/3 of our hunters did, right? Which I didn't have in my mind like a number to be expecting, but I'd say take up by 1/3 of our hunters to a new regulation is probably pretty good. I think I'm fairly satisfied. I expect that will change as people become more familiar with the regulation change, and we draw more hunters in to take advantage of it. So I think that will change. There is some regional variability. The Southeast in particular sticks out as only about a quarter of those hunters hunted after 1 p.m. at any point. Of course, the Southeast has the majority of our public land, so they weren't able to legally hunt after 1 p.m., so that does make sense. But I'll be interested to see how that shifts. I included the little quote at the bottom because I don't get a ton of super nice notes all the time. So whenever I do get a friendly one, I like to bring it up. But also the point being that the commission had a role in this as well. So I think you should enjoy some of the thanks for this as well. So one thing that did, especially that regional variation, did trigger was a question in my mind: did we see more harvest in those counties in which hunters participated more in the afternoon? I thought that would be just interesting to look at. So I put together this figure. Each of those dots on the figure is a county. And so the horizontal axis is the spring harvest per 1,000 acres of private land, and then we're comparing that against the percentage of hunters who hunted after 1 p.m. at any point in the season. And so you can see a positive trend line there. So that would imply that counties in which hunters were more likely to hunt in the afternoon shot more birds, but it's not a statistically significant trend at this point. And I think the reason behind that is just the points are they're so spread out. If they were more condensed around that line, I think it would be significant. But at this point, there's just too much spread to make it statistically significant. So again, it's likely it's a redistribution of harvest from the morning to the afternoon. But I also do want to kind of make the case. I was interested in looking at it just because that's how my brain works. But our population is very much production oriented, right? So even if we had seen a strong statistical correlation it really wouldn't be a cause for concern at this point, as far as I'm concerned. We can shoot more males than we currently do during the spring season without having an impact on the population at this time. So I thought it was interesting to have the conversation, but even if it had been a different result, I'm not sure that I would have been terribly concerned about it. So when I was thinking about regulation recommendations and what I was considering, I just want to kind of rehash what we went over. Right, we saw a good response from the regulation change, increased participation, recruitment, hunter satisfaction is trending in the right direction, and harvest and harvest per unit effort are kind of at that long-term average. So I think the population's at a good spot right now. Also, I think making a lot of frequent changes, right? If we were to go in and change a bunch of stuff, it would make it difficult to track what we were actually measuring. So I'm not generally going to be in favor of making repeated changes. It's not to say it can't be done, but I think if we do so, it makes it difficult to kind of understand what we're seeing. So with that in mind, I'm not going to suggest any changes to the existing spring turkey season structure or limits. So we would keep the all-day hunting on private land, same two-bird bag limit, same structure as before. The spring season, you'll note, is opening a little bit later. That's that same quirk of the calendar. The way the formula works for turkeys is it's the third Monday in April. So every once in a while, that just falls about a week later. So that also adjusts the youth season back as well. So that takes place 9 days before the regular season opener. The fall season, I think, again, did kind of the changes we made last year did exactly kind of what we were hoping they would do. So I would continue to maintain that structure as well with a single permit, two-bird bag limit, et cetera. Same seasons as they've always been. As far as conservation area changes, I'd recommend we remove a few. Most of those were because the property was sold or because those kind of smaller annexes are kind of captured under a bigger conservation area regulation structure. So it's just unnecessarily confusing. And then we would add a few conservation areas for turkey hunting, which is, again, I tend towards more opportunities, so that's kind of a no-brainer to me. And then I'd propose we add the Rockwoods Range to a new hunt, and that is the hunter who sent the nice note, so I thought he should enjoy place of honor on the presentation. Okay, with that, happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Thank you for highlighting those long-term habitat considerations and investments we're making. This spring at our home property, I was able to observe poults for the first time, and serendipitously, I was on the phone with Commissioner Harrison, and I'm pretty sure he thought I was having a heart attack. So I got real quiet, which isn't like me, is it, Steve? No. Also, thank you for giving us a recap on that year one data on all-day turkey hunting. I'm happy you're getting some positive feedback. I think all of the commissioners could also report positive feedback on that change, and it's great to be able to track how that's being received by the public and being used. So thank you for that. Commissioners, any questions for Nick? And please be sure to get close to your mics.
I don't really have a question, Madam Chair, but I just want to say I really enjoyed reading that super nice note that you don't get very often. I'm going to see if I can send you one, and I encourage others to do it too. This was a great presentation.
Yeah, great. I hope you get more notes.
Yeah. I wasn't fishing, but I mean, if it works, it works.
We're going to give all of our time to Mr. Harrison now.
I don't want to wear you out, but actually, I have 4 comments, questions. Okay. The season date of being the 3rd Monday of the month, this year it works out pretty well because it's later in the month. I've talked to previous biologists, talked, some information with John Lewis. He was adamant of that being later, and actually the literature, the evidence in the literature is that moving the season back effectively increases initial nesting success. That's well validated at this point in time. In the past, we used to have it effectively a week later. It used to be the last Monday or something like that in there. Like last year, it was particularly think we need to really look at consideration of doing it as a third as you watch the way the calendar year falls. You know, every 2 years out of that, it's effectively moved back a week earlier, which the evidence-based literature doesn't support that. And so I think we need to re-look at that. That's the first thing. The second thing, I just comment, I'm sorry this thing sounds like it's echoing, but on your surveys, I would suggest that you add a couple of things to them. And this is just a personal observation hunting. I used to do 90% of my hunting on public land and kind of messed around going back to some of my old haunts, and the turkey hunting is dismal there compared to what it was when I was younger. I think it'd be interesting to do about 2 or 3 things with that survey. One is designate on your brood surveys, is that from public land or private land? So we can see that. The other thing about that is looking at, are you participating in a habitat enhancement program? You know, I know you did those workshops. I think that would be valuable information because right now we've just done the workshops, but you don't have anything, you know, to do that. Or, you know, I'm sure people signed up for the workshops. I intended to go to one and I couldn't fit it into my schedule, but, you know, it's nice to see if you can show evidence that it was supported.
Yeah, right, or acted upon.
So, the last thing, could you go back to slide 261? Because this is a question for clarification.
You'll have to stop me. I've got a different
That was
slide number.
the slide on talking about hunter.
Daily harvest per
participation.
hour, is that right?
No, all day.
Oh,
And it showed data from previous to 24. And I don't understand how that's available 2000 to 23 when we didn't allow after 1 o'clock. So am I missing something in that slide?
yeah, so this is telecheck records. So you're allowed to telecheck a bird up until 10 p.m. So if you harvest a bird at 7 a.m., as long as you telecheck it that day by 10 p.m., you're legal.
Okay, just for clarification, that's not a valid assessment of when these birds were harvested.
It's not.
Okay.
No,
that-
no, and so, no, fair. That's for sure. I understand that. Yep.
Okay, because, I mean, one of the criticisms we got is, you know, it's gonna, and part of the information you presented supports that it didn't have that impact.
Yeah.
You know, kind of, you know, because the harvest numbers were up a little bit, but we don't really have any statistics to show when that actually occurred.
Yeah.
And so that slide's a little bit misleading. You know, when you go to the youth slide, if you had the information, you know, for the youth season, you know, that'd be a little bit different. But you might want to tweak that a little bit moving forward. And, you know, maybe from the telecheck standpoint, adding a comment box in, okay, when was this bird harvested?
Yeah.
And then you've got the information. Okay. The last comment that I have, and probably the most concerning one, is you indicated right at the end of your presentation, and was that, as we all know, adjacent states recognizing declining turkey populations have put very specific restrictions on non-resident hunters. They're going to draws, they're reducing turkey numbers, they're doing a number of different things. And that in turn, and you know, I've tried to read every single public comment that I get that comes in my packet, and you know, something that'll always show up and it'll be hot in there right after turkey season is the number of non-resident hunters in public hunting areas, that sort of thing. And the concerning thing that really got my attention was that because of that, it's directing more non-residents to our state. And that gets my attention because, I mean, the people that are, I mean, I know non-residents participate, they give us economic income, but we still have to show favoritism. And one suggestion, and I'm just thinking about your presentation, but, you know, a very common thing, or going to a draw is one thing that gets talked about a lot. It becomes quite challenging and cumbersome and adds a different layer. But another way to do that would be to simply say, okay, first week of season is for residents only, the next 2 weeks is non-residents. And we could do that very easily in changing the reg. And I don't know what the support of the commission would be. Maybe we can discuss it further, but to show what's happening, and you saw a 10% jump in non-residents, 10.8%, that's really not fair to our non-residents when we don't, I mean, our resident hunters, whenever we, we're getting impacted the other instructum here, but we're having our opportunity taken away elsewhere. And I don't want to get into a back and forth tit for tat on it, but I think I think that warrants a little bit of discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was simple. You could say, do we have a 3-week season? First week residents only. Iowa's done it that way for years. And Missouri, that's opportunity. Anyway, those are comments. Excellent presentation. You put a lot of work into that, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
Thanks for the comments.
Thank you. And thank you, Nick and Jason. I would like to note that you both gentlemen walked up with water bottles because you know that you're going to get a lot of questions from the commission. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Commissioners, please note that if approved, the recommendations for the spring 2025 turkey season dates is not required to go through the proposal and public comment process and will be filed immediately as an order of rulemaking with an anticipated effective date of December 31st, 2024. If approved, recommendations for spring 2024 managed hunts and conservation, sorry, that should be spring 2025 managed hunts and conservation area regulations will be incorporated by reference within the spring turkey hunting regulations booklet. Madam Chair, I request commission approval of all turkey recommendations as presented by Mr. Oakley and as detailed in your packet.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Thank you, Ray. Do we have any discussion directed toward Laura?
Yeah, I guess from my comments, and Laura, I'm looking for guidance from you on this. I don't want to put you on the spot, okay? But, we have the ability to amend, if we want to. And I'm open to comments from other commissioners, but I mean, looking at considering having the first week as residents only, the last 2 weeks as residents only, could you express your opinion on that? And I'm asking that very sincerely, Laura.
Yes, I would have to look at the code itself too to understand if there's any other areas of the code that would require review or addition before I could make a recommendation as
It
to what
would or
that would
would not
entail.
require.
Can we ask Laura that you, your team, and the turkey working group review that as an opportunity for future consideration by the commission?
Absolutely.
Is that agreeable, Steve?
Well, only comment I would say, and I don't have a question, I'll be off the commission next year. So that'll be up to others to act on that. I don't think what's happening is fair. I really since the regulation can be put in place whenever we want to, I'm just looking at the options to making sure that we're treating the residents of this state fairly.
Understood.
Because the existing framework is not treating the residents fairly. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, and if I could just highlight another group that we should consider here would be the non-resident landowners as well, of what the implications could be.
I mean, I'm not going to pursue this any further unless, I don't want to put you on the spot. Tell me what you think we should do. And I respect, I'm telling you that quite sincerely, Laura.
Yes, I think this is at the commission's discretion. My recommendation would be that staff should evaluate what the implications of that change could mean. I do think Chairwoman Eckelkamp brings up a valid point regarding non-resident landowners, because we do provide certain exceptions for non-resident landowners as well in terms of discounted permits and things like that. So there are those other considerations that I think are worthy of discussion.
May I?
Sure,
offer a
go ahead,
comment?
Commissioner Wagner.
Perhaps this amendment to approve these recommendations could be accepted with an amendment to that resolution that it be brought back to us at the next meeting after review, consideration, a good faith review and consideration of the impact and the possibility and the intertwining with the code about a first-week non-resident, or first-week resident hunt only. With that, in other words, it stays as a conscious component, but yet allows you to go forward with these recommendations to begin to do some preparation.
My only comment on that
Go ahead,
is
Steve.
that, our meeting's not till February, and I think it pushes it too far out
Yes.
from a non-resident standing point. I think, in all fairness to the non-residents, that would not be fair. I think you're moving it too far along in it. I mean, I'm comfortable with going ahead and approving this, but we can't continue to see discrimination of resident, non-resident. And we got a bunch of comments on other areas on
Right.
this. And we continue to ignore them, and I own land in an adjacent state. They just made the regulations even more discriminatory. And, we are not being proactive and being respectful of our citizens. And there's an element of that I'm not very comfortable with.
Understood. Understood, sir.
I think Commissioner Harrison brings up a very fair point, and it was actually something I was going to highlight about Nick's presentation in particular today, that he did give us a lot of data about our neighboring states, and that is something that we always evaluate with our regulations. I really appreciate, Steve, your advocacy here for our citizens and making sure that we are putting them first. And I would suggest, if the commission is agreeable, we move forward today, but we ask staff to make sure that this is a priority, where we look for the research that we need across the code to make sure we understand the implications and consider the alternatives moving forward.
And I'm comfortable with that, Maria. I don't want to keep ignoring this problem.
Understood.
And,
I think that's fair.
the slide, as I was watching that, and Nick, it's pretty evident, and it's probably going to continue to escalate. So, anyway, and I don't want to take non-resident opportunities away, but I also want to recognize who really pays most of the bills.
Right. And it's definitely something that staff could look at in depth, comparing to other states, and then those potential implications for the code and the other considerations that we would need to make under such a proposal.
Thank you.
Excellent discussion. Yes, Mark?
Just to make sure that we encapsulate that discussion, since it looks like this is the direction we go for approval, that somehow we need to make sure this is properly incorporated into the minutes.
Mhm.
So we can go back on those concerns. Is
Absolutely.
that a fair statement? Okay, thank you.
Could it be incorporated into the motion?
I think we're okay. I think we're okay. Okay, with that discussion wrapped up, I will make the call for votes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, a summary of regulation comments received since your last meeting is included in my formal report, beginning on page 2. Madam Chair, unless you or members of the commission have any questions, this concludes my regulations report.
Well, because we're talking about deer, turkey, and everything else, we do have at least one more question. Commissioner
Absolutely.
Harrison?
Yeah?
No, I am asking this question, and I'm asking it in open session for a couple of reasons. One is, we get letters in our packets. I think all of us try to read all of them, and, one of the comments I got that actually did not set well with me was that we never read anything. You guys respond to them, and that's the end of the story, and which I'm here to tell you it's not. But there was one comment that I thought was actually a rather good one. It was by Alex Abramovitz about the excess black bear bear tags that were not utilized. And I think I was shocked whenever you had responded and said 15 to 20% of the tags are not claimed. Western states that have draws on everything, they encounter that, and, they become available on a first come, first served basis. And it's a win-win for everybody. Economically, we get paid for them. And, if we've established that opportunity should be there, and I hope we seriously look at making these available. Because, we intended for them to be made available, and there was some different ideas of why they weren't being, and that's fine, I'm not going to bring those up. But bottom line is, I think it's a very valid comment, and I think it's something we should act on.
We can certainly have staff take a look at that.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We will adjourn here for a break, and we will reconvene at 10:45.
Scarfed a bunch of ambassadors.
I did. I'm gonna give it to my.
We are going to reconvene. And next on our agenda, we have a presentation from Melanie Crane. And welcome Melanie as Chief Budget Officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Sumners. I'm going to present the October financial statements. If you take a look at the revenue variance report, the total revenues in fiscal year 25 through October 2024 were 1.1% lower than fiscal year 24 and 1% above expectations for this point in the fiscal year. Conservation sales tax receipts were 1.5% above the same time period in fiscal year 24 and 2.5% above expectations. Permit revenues were 11.5% higher than October last year and 11.6% above expectations. The number of monetary hunting and fishing permits sold during the first 4 months of fiscal year 25 were 95,881 lower than the previous year. Federal reimbursements were 17.5% lower than this time last year and 9.8% below expectations. Federal reimbursements for fiscal year 25 through October represent approximately 17.8% of total revenues, and other revenue sources for the first 4 months of fiscal year 25 were 5.5% higher than this point last fiscal year and in line with expectations. On the expenditure variances, the total operating expenditures for the first 4 months of fiscal year 25 were 4.6% higher than the first 4 months of fiscal year 24 and 1.3% below expectations. Personal service disbursements were 6.8% above the previous fiscal year and 1.1% below expectations through October 2024. Expenses were 3.5% higher than fiscal year 24 and 2.8% below expectations for the first 4 months of fiscal year 25. Equipment disbursements were 34.9% lower than fiscal year 24 to date and 20.7% above expectations. Total capital disbursements were 1.7% lower than the previous fiscal year through October and 3.5% below the budgeted amount at this point in the fiscal year last year. Large construction payments in October included work for Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery renovations, Shepherd of the Hills Fish Hatchery renovations, Chesapeake Fish Hatchery exterior building renovations, the Springfield Conservation Nature Center roof replacement, the Shell Osage Conservation Area Phase 1 pump station development, the August A. Bush Memorial Conservation Area exterior building renovations, Conservation Headquarters site renovation, the Anita B. Gorman Discovery Center entrance canopy replacement, the Runge Nature Center siding replacement, and the Columbia Bottom Conservation Area road relocation. There were no land acquisition payments made in October, but there were partnership payments made for a low water crossing replacement in Dallas County. And total disbursements for October of 2025 were 3.4% higher than the first 4 months of fiscal year 24 and 1.7% below expectation. This concludes my remarks on the fiscal year 25 financial summary report through October. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melanie. Commissioners, any questions?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for your presentation. Equipment looks to be an outlier on that graph up there. So
Yeah.
can you kind of a little more detail on the,
Sure. So the comparison on the budget side of things is the timing of the equipment that we received in fiscal year 25. We actually got in a lot of trucks earlier than we anticipated, so the expenditure is higher than what the budget was anticipated. On the comparing this year to last year, there were some extremely large payments that were made in the first quarter last year for, let's see, I think it was fleet and mobile radio replacements. So there was a variance there comparing those
So it's all
two.
about timing in that situation.
It is a lot about timing.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner, any other questions for Melanie? Okay, Melanie, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to welcome Tom Neubauer, our Chief of Human Resource Branch.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about and give you an update on the Conservation Employees Benefits Plan quarterly update. And just as a reminder, this is talking about the first 9 months of plan performance in calendar year 2023 compared to the first 9 months of this calendar year. The insurance plan does operate on a calendar year, fiscal year of sorts, different from the department. But in that, when we compare those two time periods, the fund balance has grown from $5.4 million in September of 2023 to $7.4 million in September of 2024, a 10% increase in active and retiree premiums that was effective January 1st, 2024, resulted in a $2.9 million increase in plan income. The fund balance also was helped by the $2 million plan infusion the Commission provided in early 2024, again to ensure that the fund reserve stays at the actuarially recommended level of approximately 2.5 times our monthly planned expenditures. Medical claims increased by a total of $476,000. That was made up of actually a decrease of $58,000 in claims for actives in the plan, while retiree claims increased by approximately $540,000. Prescription claims increased by about a little over $1 million, with $650,000 of this increase coming from our active members, which is about a 20% increase compared to 2023, and approximately $389,000 of the increase coming from our retired members, which is about a 10% increase for prescription benefits for them. The board took action to increase 2025 plan income to match projected medical and prescription expenses by retiering our premium structure for active and retired members covering dependents and inflationary increases to member premiums once the retiering was applied. Percentage increases did differ among our participant populations based upon differences in actuarially projected increases in cost for each of our populations. So actives increased by about 4%, pre-65 retirees increased by about 6.6%, and post-65s increased by 11.8%. The board also offered a new 2025 Medicare Advantage plan option for our post-65 retirees. And thanks to Sue and her team for all the work they did to roll that out and talk to our retirees about their new option. But however, since the plan was offered as an option for retirees and with the caveat preventing retirees from returning to our existing self-insured plan, members were hesitant to make the change in year one. So approximately 70 or about 8% of our post-65 members and surviving spouses have elected that advantage for 2025. They were very excited by the option for a much lower premium with comparable coverages, but like I said, there was some risk adverse to not being able to come back on our plan. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the Commission may have.
Tom, thank you for this information. The benefits that we provide to all of our team members, active and retirees, are incredibly important to the Commission. Commissioners, any questions for Tom? Yes, Mark.
So when you started your presentation, you mentioned the fund balance. I think I heard 5.4 million.
Right.
In the past, well, a year ago, and then now we're at 7.4.
Correct. So we were 5.4 in September of last year, and we're at 7.4 in September of this year. Obviously, we're in December now, so
Yeah,
we'll give
sure.
the new financials.
Fall of this year versus fall of last year.
Yes,
So
sir.
The $2 million infusion
Right.
is what got us to the 7.4. Is that correct? correct?
So that helped, to be certain, but we also had increased revenues because of the 10% increase to premiums that at the beginning of this year, which generated over $2 million in new revenue to the plan.
So a combination. That's
Right.
interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have several, as you already know, because I've sent you some
Sure.
information. One thing you mentioned, is this thing going, is it better if I move it away? You mentioned in 23, active employees had a 10% increase in premiums,
Actives and retirees, we made an across-the-board increase of 10%.
just 10%
Correct.
across the board.
So that applies to their, obviously, the prior year's premium, and it's a 10% increase.
Now, this year, we differentiated, correct? We
This
did
year-
the notes here, active at 3.7, pre-65, 6.6, and post-65, 11.8.
So the board did two things, Commissioner. We did the re-tiering. So what we did when we took the look at, and you may recall, we have individual and spouse, we have individual and children, or we have family. So 4 tiers for all of for actives, post-65s, and pre-65s. But what we discovered when we were working with our consultant and taking a look at the actuarial results for projected claims was we were not getting the revenue from, especially our family and dependent coverages in all of those groups that were needed to come to meet our projected claims for those groups. So we made changes to those premium structures, right? And then also applied that inflationary dollar, again, to hit our targets of revenue needed for projected claims for each group.
Okay, so projected claims for the group, and for everybody's information, I've already given Tom a heads up with
Yep.
the questions.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like I'm trying to put you on the spot.
Mhm.
But when we start looking at and I'll say this different ways. First off, everybody in this room is going to be a retiree at some point, hopefully. I mean, that's the goal. You know, we want to retain you as an employee, and we want you to be a retiree. And, you know, we've had some outside discussions on this, and, you know, as far as what the commission's commitment is on retirees, and this is something I'm very interested in.
Right.
And it's not fishing and deer and turkeys either. So anyway, but give us the history whenever we ask to break out the groups of where expenses, because, you know, the commission's put a $3 million infusion in this in the most recently. And so one of the things of being a self-insured, all the actuarial or Willis Towers Watson, you know, can give us advice. If their advice is not correct, we have the ability to modify it or adjust it or come in with extra money if we need to.
Correct.
And so when we differentiate the groups, even though you've changed your tier levels on them, can you give us a synopsis of where we're in line, making money, the group's not making money, costing us more, that sort of thing? Can you give us a breakdown of that, Tom?
So there's 2 prongs to it when we're taking a look at recommended changes to premiums, Commissioner. So we do take a look at the past 2 or 3 years of plan experience. And what we found consistently was the money coming in for our members who have dependents, whether it's spouse and/or children, was not meeting expectations needed for the claims that were actually occurring.
To clarify, that was for active.
That's for actives, and for all of our retirees, either pre or post 65.
The question I had sent you
Right.
via email was to segregate those and
Yep.
give me a breakdown of active employees, pre-65 retires, post-65 retires, and tell me on claims made, premiums paid, how that pans out.
That's a complicated question that we can certainly provide the information to you and the rest of the commission on, because it gets into not only the claims, but it also gets into, for instance, on our post-65s, we do receive a subsidy from Medicare for the prescription coverage. So we have to take a look at all streams of revenues that are helping to cover the costs for each of the groups. So I'm not trying to dodge your question, but it's one that I think would be better suited in terms of print to the commission than here.
And I'll expand on it, and this is for everybody in the room to understand. What Tom's alluding to there is that if you're post 65 and you're retired, you are required to sign up for Medicare. Forget the Medicare Advantage issue. You're required to sign up for Medicare, and you're required to use that as your primary insurance.
Correct.
And to give everybody an understanding of why I'm asking these questions, you know, one of our retirees contacted me and said, you know, what in the world's going on with the 11.8% increase whenever we had a 10% last year? And I want to show you something. And gave me a breakdown of their medical expenses and of what Medicare actually paid and what our plan paid. And Medicare covered 80% of their expenses.
Mhm.
And so when you start looking at the insurance benefits that are available to these people, and you look at the liability exposure that they're causing to the plan, and I've talked to Eric about this too, you know that, and I'm being very transparent
Sure.
with you. But on the generic numbers in 2023, that post-65 group was about $1 million positive, and through the first 3 quarters, they're about right at $660,000 positive. And the reason I'm bringing that to point is, okay, of the one group that's actually been significantly positive, because we made a $2 million infusion into this deal,
Mhm.
they're getting hit the hardest on the premium increase. And I absolutely can't get the math together on that as far as, you know, understanding it. And they're questioning it, Tom. And I think it's a pretty valid question, something that I don't fully understand, you know, but just from a discussion standpoint, I know you try to make your decisions based on actuarial advice and Willis Towers Watson's advice,
Mhm.
but it also requires someone to sit down and look at it and say, you know, if I was in the other shoes, because you're going to be there,
Right.
how do I feel about it? What's my thoughts? That's what I'm trying to get an understanding for, because, you know, I had the input on the spot. And, you know, Sue was very helpful. I mean, and I want to acknowledge Sue. Where you at, Sue? Raise your hand up there. Because,
Just taking notes.
you know, because I was like, when I got a phone call, I was like, okay, Sue, you know, I don't know squat about this, and I need a little help. And I kept you on the phone for an hour and a half. And I really appreciate that, you know, the help. Because I'm trying to understand the topic, because it is a topic that
Sure.
is challenging for me. But, you know, that's the questions we're getting asked, and need to understand it better.
Yep. So I would point out, Commissioner, that while the percentage is higher for the post-65, the dollars are significantly less, because to your point, since Medicare is primary for our post-65s, depending on the tier you're in, the premium you're paying is about 2.5 to 3 times less than what the pre-65s are paying. So even though the percentage is higher, the total dollar impact to those post-65 retirees is significantly less than to our actives and to our pre-65 retirees.
Could you send us a breakout of that?
Yes,
So we could actually see
absolutely.
it, Tom? I think it'd be very helpful.
Yep.
for
Yeah,
folks to
we-
understand that. Because it
Yep.
gets complicated when we say, okay, well, the commission's paying 65%.
Right.
I'm very proud if we change that from
Yes.
35 to 65.
I
or
am
we
too.
change it from 65 to 85. You
Yep.
know, I mean, that's something that's been important to me, you know, in looking at this. But to see just the basic number and say, okay, what's
Yep.
my active employee by themselves paying? What's my
Right.
pre-65 retire? And to actually see that so I could validate the number you're saying,
Yep,
I think would
absolutely.
be helpful for us.
Yeah, that's part of what Sue and her team presented to the retirees whenever they went out and talked through them considering their options of our traditional plan versus the Advantage plan and things like that. So that's really easy for us to put together for you.
If you provide that to us,
Yep.
because there needs to be validation of.
Yep. Oh,
I mean, a 10.5, I mean, a 20.5%, 22% raise in premiums.
Yep.
And the other group at a 13%, that's not a very comfortable discussion.
Right. And we'll talk through actual dollars, which I think will help build understanding here.
Well, the actual dollars are of interest, Tom, but also you got to remember that the percentage is what the percentage is. The real dollars, and those people are working on less income now in retirement than what they were when they were active. So it has a bigger impact on them.
Sure.
So anyway,
Understood.
other discussion? Tom, thank you very much
Thank
for that
you.
update.
And happy holidays.
Thanks, Tom.
Next, I would like to shift a little bit to infrastructure and call forward Jacob. And Clint, you ready? He's ready. Or is Jacob going to introduce Clint? Okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Director Sumners. So I do have the next 3 agenda items. The first one, it's a joint presentation with Clint Hale, Hatchery Systems Manager. We're going to provide an update to the Commission on the November flood impacts. So this presentation, I'll give you some background on the storm. We'll talk about the flooding emergency response. Clint will talk specifically about impacts to hatcheries and recovery activities there. Then I will follow up with a report on the damage assessments and what the next steps are. So leading up to the first weekend in November, those of us that pay attention to infrastructure and water and those sorts of how they don't always mix, we were paying attention to a forecasted heavy precipitation event for our part of the country. And you see on the graphic there that originally the heaviest precipitation was forecast to hit around the Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri intersection, those borders. And they were forecasting 12 inches of rain in a 36 to 48 hour period, which got our attention. But there was this section of their forecast where they were talking about locally up to 18 inches of rain. First, we were very concerned with the infrastructure that's in the southwest part of the state. We have several hatcheries there, as you know. They are very exposed to flood events. But as the event unfolded, it actually shifted eastward. And this is actual precipitation accumulations. And you can see a very narrow band of dark red on the graphic there, where locally they did receive over a foot of rain in a very short amount of time. Now, this flood event was different than some of the previous events we've experienced in the last decade because it was a smaller area, but the intensity was higher in a shorter amount of time. So much more flash flooding situation than it is a longer duration flood that we've been experienced in the past. Then if you zeroed in very closely to the most intense rainfall, close to Salem, they experienced 18 inches of rain, which is quite surprising in such a short amount of time. So that much rain, that small of an area, that short amount of time, of course, resulted in some significant flash flooding. It even closed I-44 for some time, for over 20 miles. You can see here this image of I-44 and some of the traffic that's been stranded. This is the Gasconade River adjacent to I-44. And you can see in the lower left-hand part of the photograph, that's the new Jerome access. So just to give you context, since we've been there recently for a ribbon cutting. This is Highway 32 on the Big Piney. Highway 17 near Rubidoux. And so with all the flash flooding events, as you know, the Protection Division works very closely with other emergency response agencies, and they had over conservation agents participated in over 20 emergency response incidents with all across this region. That included evacuations, traffic control, swiftwater rescues, as well as some body recoveries. So that's the flood. And now Clint will take over and share some highlights on the hatcheries themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, commissioners. I'm happy to present on Impacts to the hatcheries, mainly just two hatcheries. That was Merrimack and Montauk. Largest floods in these two parks' history. I wanted to give some comparison here. This is Merrimack, this is their office out front. In 2017, you can see the water, how it got to the base of the door. It actually got about a foot higher. When it crested, it's hard to find two pictures of the same place at the peak of the flood, but I got really close. You can see in 2024, it got up, it actually got up about a foot higher than what you see in that picture. So everything in that office was just in disarray. And you can see, this is the entrance of the park. So most of the park was flooded. This is a picture down by the raceways. A flood at Merrimack is different than Montauk. It's a little closer up. You can see the clear water from the spring coming through there. This is the raceways here. The ironworks are where the muddy water is. The muddy water is the Merrimack River backing into the park. That's what causes the real problems at this facility, is the backwater. So you don't have a lot of current, but you have a lot of muddy, trashy water. This is a picture of the raceways covered. Those covers were built in 2006, and they've saved numerous tens of thousands of trout over the years. One big thing I forgot to mention that I want to mention with these floods is they're always impactful, they're never fun, they're always stressful, but we had no staff injuries. It's a big positive. And we do have fish, so we're going to have a trout season next year. I'm happy to say that. I'm confident that we're going to do the best we can with what we have. Montauk, a little bit different, much more swift of a flood, a lot of current. A little hard to see in 2017, but this is the old mill. If you're not familiar with Montauk, this is the old historic mill. They rest about at the head end of our mill raceways at Montauk. That's where we keep most of our fish in Montauk, the majority of the larger fish. You can see it got close to the bottom of the deck in the left picture in 2017. That was and let me back up a little bit, 2017 was the previous high flood. Fast forward to 2024, got much higher, substantial damage to the foundation of that mill. I think they're going to be able to save the mill. I hope so, because it's such a centerpiece to that hatchery and that state park. This is the lake raceway. So you can see a lot of debris. This is, you can see the cover, so you can kind of tell where the raceways are, but they're completely covered with water. There's no real way to cover these like a Merrimack. Merrimack's just a narrow channel, and they can get them on fairly quickly. There's really no way to cover these raceways. A lot of times what you see with a flood, even though it's dirty water, the trout they'll hunker down in the raceways, and so you do have some that stay and don't go into the river. This is at the office. You can see the office in the upper right. Those are the intermediate raceways. You can see the amount of debris and the amount of leaves. All the year, you're going to get a lot of leaves. Really tore up those bird predation nets. This is after the water had kind of receded a little bit. The water actually got into the office. We actually had some fish swimming around in the break room, which I don't want to see that again. That was terrible. With that, we did lose some fry and some eggs because the basement was totally submerged. But we've been able to recover that with our federal partners and got a lot of eggs. So we're not. My hope, and I'm very confident that we're not going to impact 2026 because of this flood. This is the mill raceway system. And I'm going to give you a close-up. You can kind of see the water coming in the upper right. A lot of current. A little bit closer, that's water rushing through the fence. So an initial big surge. That's what I'm saying. I'm so thankful that no staff were injured in this, because it really could have been, to any flood's very dangerous. But once this happens, there's really nothing we can do. The water actually, that one's a little hard to see. that's the top of the pump house in the mill raceways. There's a retaining wall, earthen retaining wall all around those raceways, and it got above the fence that goes around that berm. So all of our equipment, everything was totally submerged. Their propane tank from the office actually come through there at one point, which was just crazy to see. The gauge malfunctioned. I think it was around 4 a.m., something like that. But as you can see, the water, it went straight up. I mean, when you get 16 inches overnight, the water level is going to rise very, very quickly. And a new record, 19 and a half feet, and that's about 6 feet higher than the previous record in 2017. Recovery, a lot of debris. We got, I think, around 200 loads of debris, infrastructure maintenance did just from the raceways alone. Now, state park staff, they're still removing debris from the park. Just the tremendous impact it had on infrastructure is pretty devastating. And it's why that park is going to remain closed until we're hoping that they'll open it back up before March 1st. Towards the end of February is what I think the date that they have now. You can see some sand. It's really nice sand. It's like beach sand, but there's a lot of it, and it's hard to remove. This kind of gives you an idea. I think the next. This picture is close to the level of 2017. This year, it got above the fence. So a lot more water. Recovery efforts, man, I can't thank staff from other hatcheries, SRM, RRM, infrastructure maintenance, infrastructure, communications, education. I mean, a total team effort. It's taken a lot of people, a lot of staff, news releases, recovery efforts, working with our partners to get eggs and fish, and it's a total team effort for sure. And I do want to say really special shout out to Cecil Collier and Mark Duncan. I mean, without them trying to get our pumps back so we can inventory fish and just the cleanup that Mark's crew did, I can't thank them enough. And that was part of getting the debris out of the head end of the system was important so we could evenly distribute the water throughout the raceways. So all the fish had the same amount of water. So you're not starving water from one raceway or the other. We're currently inventorying Montauk. It's taken a little while to get that accomplished. I think within the next month or so, we should have a really good idea on the numbers that we're going to have in the mill system. Merrimack, where we had the raceways covered, we were able to save around 30,000 fish in those raceways. That park and the other parks are still open for catch and release, but Montauk, of course, is not because the park is closed. So anyway, I'm going to hand it back over to, and the warm water hatcheries really stepped up too with holding some eggs, frying fingerlings. They can only hold them till about March, till they start into walleye production. So they've been, we always, as cold water say, we work as a system, and warm water works as a system. We're working as a big system now, 9 hatcheries. Have all stepped up, whether it be helping or taking on trout. So with that, I want to hand it over to Jacob, and we'll take questions after he's done with the damage assessments.
Thank you. So after the floodwaters receded, we mobilized staff using procedures we had already established from previous floods, go out and do initial damage assessments. So this is staff in the regions, infrastructure maintenance teams, going out, working with hatchery staff and identifying all the infrastructure was damaged, doing initial data collection of those assets, using information from our infrastructure asset management system to identify them, taking some initial photographs and doing some initial assessment of what type of repairs might be needed. We also used that information to communicate with SEMA because they needed some very quick information to help assess the level of damage in the counties so they could determine if they met the requirements for a federal disaster declaration. So in addition to the damage that Clint shared in the hatcheries, there was this image here of Dog's Bluff access on the Big Piney is representative of a lot of the type of damage that we experienced across the affected area. So you see a lot of erosion, a lot of the parking lot aggregate was removed. You see a lot of down trees, and then at the end there in the red circle, you see the end of the boat ramp has actually been flipped over. So oftentimes I've shared before about how conservation infrastructure helps connect people with nature, but sometimes it's a challenge when nature doesn't want us there. And this is a really good example of that. So this map depicts the damage assessments that have been completed so far, and you can see that in that yellow ellipse, it aligns with the heaviest precipitation that I shared on the previous slide. And so Montauk, in addition to the damage that Clint shared, there is significant erosion of levees. This concrete structure you see here is a project we completed just a few months ago to replace a recirculation valve. And you can see the erosion around that structure. Thankfully, the structure was not affected by the flood, but we will have to make repairs to that levee where the erosion was. As Clint mentioned, a lot of the infrastructure, the equipment that we used to operate the hatchery was inundated. So on these photographs are of the backup generator that power all the systems that they utilize in the Millpool Raceways. So that was completely submerged, and you can see in the photograph on the right inside that generator cabinet, all the electrical equipment, all the sediment, all the things that we'll have to go through, clean out, and repair. Within the pump house building that Clint shared earlier was completely underwater. You see in the left-hand picture, all the electrical equipment, all those cabinets, the switch gear, those were all inundated. That system was energized when the flood waters came into the Millpool Raceways. And on the right-hand side, you see the diesel power unit that powers the recirculation pump system. And of course, that was in operation at the time of the flood, so that's a total loss as well. A lot of electrical components at hatcheries that help with variable frequency drives, switch gear, power distribution, all those items were underwater. I'm sure you all have experienced in your own lives that water and electricity don't mix well, so we're going to have to go through and go replace much of this electrical equipment if it can't be cleaned and repaired. Also, in the hatchery building itself, Clint did share that there was water in the building, so there's a lot of cleanup that has to happen there, and we need to get water, moisture out of the building cavities. So there's a lot of cleanup work to do there. And then as Clint mentioned, the actual basement of the hatchery building where the egg production, fry rearing happens, that was completely submerged. So all the equipment, electrical equipment that's in there, total loss, we need to go through all the electrical systems and make sure it's safe for use so staff do not get injured if we re-energize those systems. So extensive damage across the affected area, a lot of details to work out. So next steps. So the minor repairs are in progress, and when I say minor, I'm talking about a lot of the erosion, like what you saw at Dog's Bluff access, a lot of parking lot, roads across the area. We need to complete the damage assessments. So we completed the initial damage assessments. Now the engineers and architects are working very closely with regional staff to go through in detail of those damaged assets and determine what the appropriate repairs might be. We need to submit those damage assessments to SEMA. Because these are in floodplains, this infrastructure needs to get a clearance from SEMA before we can proceed with the repairs because of a floodplain development permit process that we have with our partner agency. In addition, where this infrastructure is below the ordinary high water mark, we also need to work with the Department of Natural Resources to get a water quality certification before we can proceed with that work. So those permitting processes could take up to 3 months to get final approval before we can start the repairs. to then prioritize the major repairs because not all the work can be done at the same time, and we need to work through in a stepwise fashion, make sure we're doing the most important work at the appropriate time. Need to develop a communication plan for both internal customers and our external customers on when those repairs will be completed and when services will be restored. And then we need to start the work of completing the repairs. So a lot ahead of us. A lot of work has been done up to this point, but just want to make sure everybody understands that there's a lot of work to recover from this very significant flood event. And then what we don't know at this point is if there will be a federal disaster declaration. So SEMA is gathering information from all the affected individuals and agencies and submitting that information to the federal government, and then it'll be the federal government's determination. It'll be their decision to make on whether or not a declaration is made. That if a declaration is made, we've already been capturing our costs and time, equipment use, so that we could submit for reimbursement if a disaster is declared at the federal level. So that concludes our presentation, and Clint and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Jacob and Clint, thank you so much for sharing that update. I just also want to share from the commission that we are relieved to hear that we had no staff injuries, and we appreciate everybody's dedication to the emergency response, but also making sure that they stay safe. With 1,400 team members across the state, it's always top of mind for us that folks are taking care of themselves. So thank you for that update. I have one question, Jacob. Any damage at the George White Tree Nursery that we should be aware of?
Yes, there is. Many of the roads, the road system were eroded, but the most significant thing for the commission to know about is that there's one bridge that crosses the tributary there that is the access point to the actual nursery offices and operations. The approaches to the bridge on both sides were washed out, and so it is not safe for heavy truck traffic. The shipping season is coming in January, and so we're working very closely with trying to identify potential solutions to bridge that creek right there so that we can get trucks back and forth. We worked very closely with the National Guard, seeing if they had some potential solutions that did not turn out to be feasible, so we were working with some commercial vendors to see if we can get some bridge jumpers rented to provide access.
Thank you, Jacob. Commissioners, I will defer to you for any questions of this duo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple questions. Would you consider this a 500-year flood or a 100-year flood?
I don't think they've made a determination yet, but based upon my understanding, it exceeded a 100-year flood event.
Okay, so somewhere between 100 and 500. And the next question, just to clarify the math, if you get a federal declaration, what I recall, that's a 75%, and then SEMA would do probably 15%, and then 10% falls back to the department. Is that correct?
I think parts of that are. I think the 75% from the federal is reimbursable. How you go about your repairs, if you put the same thing back, then I believe there's additional funding available for reimbursement. If you do something different, then that changes the calculations. So it's a case-by-case basis depending on what repairs you do.
So on that line, which I'd call mitigation, you show a generator underwater and some equipment underwater. If you put it back where it is, it's potential flood again. What about raising it to a higher elevation?
So those are things that our engineering staff are working through right now, looking at those options. So for example, in the pump house picture that I showed, the electrical panels, we are evaluating the feasibility of moving those panels out of the building and on a platform up above the building. But then there are other considerations we have to work through, like we're in a state park and view shed and other things. So,
yeah, I understand all that. Yeah. Well, it's pretty logical. I mean, there again, this sounds like a real outlier as far as the amount of water in a short period of time.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the buildings, for example, Clint, you got 2017 and 2024, and then I think about, quite frankly, where we were last night. I mean, the building's on piers. So when's the time come that you raise the building and put it on piers?
So Montauk, We are currently working through the conceptual design of renovating the whole hatchery, right? So those are things that we are talking about, and I've actually discussed that with Clint, that we need to revisit some of our design assumptions for that
Well,
location.
thank you. I mean, the raceways probably are going to have to be where they are. I understand that. You can't change the water level, but if you can do anything from an infrastructure to get it out of the, and I realize there's the cost associated with that. But as long as we're looking at the options and the possibility of having to deal with it. Thank you. You're welcome.
Commissioner Wagner, Commissioner Harrison,
Just a brief question.
even closer, Ray.
A brief question, comment. Obviously thrilled that there were no injuries, serious injuries or deaths, but how are our employees down there handling this and dealing with it every day, and what more can we do, and are they being supported? I mean, in so many ways, their life's passion, their contributions to public service has all been devastated for the moment. And so what's that like?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And no doubt, this is what they do. I went through floods before too, and it'll affect you. When it's your livelihood, there's nothing you can do about it, and it's gone, or at least some of them are gone. I've been in contact with that staff weekly, daily, sometimes. Tom Whalen, the co-water system supervisor, has been in contact with them daily. And they're doing really well. I mean, they're very dedicated. They're very good staff. They're working through the things, and we're helping them with whatever they need, and Jacob's staff too. So,
Well, they undoubtedly suffer personal harm in their homes as well, and so they're dealing with all aspects of their lives. So
yeah.
I want to say, as commissioner, perhaps on behalf of the commission, that we are keeping our thoughts and so on as we move the repair office. And Jacob, to your team, that's always there. You always get to do the cleanup one way or the other. So thank you to your team.
Let me add to that too, and yeah, great work, Jacob and Clinton, your staff, but our agents that were involved, Swiftwater Rescue, I mean, it's some pretty high-risk, heroic kind of work. And I know they're the ones that are out there very, very quick when this starts happening, and that's where someone can obviously be swept away, and clearly their actions are to be commended as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot to mention protection. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're doing great work.
Yes, Commissioner Harrison.
My last topic to ask questions on.
I'm not going to hold you to that. I expect more.
I was going to start by asking you to give us a synopsis of Piper's book on hatchery management that I gave you when you first came on the commission, to tell us about water source usage.
So staff take note, he also puts fellow commissioners in the hot seat. So Commissioner Harrison, what I learned from the book that you gave me on day one of coming on the commission is the number one priority is water quality
And we're
and where it comes from.
very good. You get it. Hey, as usual. So that's just a harassment, but anyway. But question for Jacob: how did Jerome Access hold up from that?
Wonderful. No damage.
Perfect. That's wonderful to hear, because that's been a big issue. You know, I know you showed the photos of it, and it looked like it held up well. So
Just some silt to clean off.
nice to hear. Clint, where are you at? And I'm just going to ask some real basic questions. One thing that jumped out at me that you said there, and my phone's on dictation to my wife text, so that'll be good. So, okay. She'll wonder what that's about. Anyway, you said should be good for 2026.
Yeah.
You didn't say 2025.
Right, it's going to be impacted for sure with the fish that we lost. We don't know that number yet. We cleaned a lot of debris out with a backhoe, but that's not a finish machine. When we were able to get the pumps with Jacob's help to lower the water level so we can get in there with other equipment, still a lot of siltation and debris in those raceways. Once we remove that, we'll start grading the fish because they're all mixed up. It's small fish, big fish. We'll get those fish graded, and then we'll inventory. I'd say within the first part of January, I can have a preliminary plan like I develop every year for these stocking projections, and I'll have that sometime in January, I hope.
Well, and kind of leads to a couple of questions that as you know, I've been interested in. But on the crystal ball aspect, and the one information you could give me is, so what did our stocking rate end up being for '24? I know that we originally looking at 2.5, we were looking at reducing that to around 1.75 to 2.0. What really happened in '24?
I'd have to look back. I think we ended up around 1.9 as a system, something like that. We were shooting for 1.8. We ended up at 1.9. Usually that's what you see because it's hard because you're stocking every night based on past history. And you'll miss it sometimes and hit it really good other times. But we got close. It was 1.9, really close to 2. But I can provide that to you.
Well, and it's kind of a two-part question. Of course, I've been interested on priorities of stocking between our traditional trout streams and the urban stocking thing. I know we had a long discussion of that before, and when we reduced the stocking rate in traditional stocking, we did it by 20%, but we chose to not reduce it any in the urban stocking things. And actually, there was a proposal last year to even add another cap program, which I was not supportive of. So given that we lost, and I think we lost close to 1 million fish in Montauk, that's the rumor I've heard. Is that correct or incorrect?
I don't know, but it's not 1 million because we didn't have 1 million on site. So we didn't lose that many. But I don't really know the number yet until we get an inventory of how many we lost.
Well, and kind of 2 or 3 parts to the question, but I don't know where the fish were coming. I know the original trout report from 2017, all of the fish really were supposed to, for urban stocking, were supposed to come from a private source, particularly Crystal Lake. That's what it said very clearly in that document. And we have not been following that document. And I know Bruce, as I bring that up, he said, well, that document's not valid anymore. So I was kind of, okay.
We are going to revise that document.
I understand, but you can see the other side of the coin. You don't like how it says, so we say it's not valid, but so that didn't set the best with me. But anyway, that's another topic. But so this year, are we stocking 100% in the winter stocking, or are we adjusting it because we're anticipating problems in our traditional stocking areas?
So we had some initial stockings that we did in the winter program. When we had this flood on November 4th, and when we assessed the damage, we decided to hold on some stockings until we can further see where our inventory is and what we need to do for 2024. So, and we'll evaluate everything for 2024.
And for 2025, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
And yeah, and Clint, I know you are very responsible in that, but and maybe it's personal, and I don't want to try to interject this inappropriately, but our traditional stocking areas are Montauk, Merrimack, Bennett, and that sort of thing. And I think personally, I think that should always be the priority. That's where the hatchery programs are at. That's where we support them. The way that the winter stocking program is, I mean, traditionally, every water source in the state of Missouri is a potentially stocking site for trout because of the water temperature. And so I think we need to weigh that quite closely, and particularly with the loss of fish this year, that ends up being something that we need to be attentive to, so we're going to make sure we can fulfill obligations. If we start getting down to 1 fish per tag, which that's the rumor I'm hearing for 25, that's going to be devastating to some of these economies in these areas. And Bennett, of course, is another challenge. But I know you're looking at those, but
Yeah.
I want you to know that the commission is actually very interested in it. I don't think I'm the only one that is. But but I appreciate the efforts. You've got quite a challenge ahead of you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I will provide that as soon as I get it.
Thanks.
Commissioner Wagner?
Just a very quick reaction. I agree with everything Commissioner Harrison said. However, the stocking program elsewhere in the state is very important, and in spite of these challenges, it's important to the people in these parts of the state elsewhere. So finding that balance is the critically important thing. I just didn't want to go unsaid that.
Oh, sure. And I would agree with Commissioner Harrison that I think all of our customers are going to have to make concessions in the year forward, and we don't know what those concessions are going to be, right, Clint? You guys are going to do the inventory. But I think it should be expected, to Commissioner Wagner's point, that there is a balance of who we serve, but everybody is probably going to have to live in the reality that we're all living in because of these extreme weather events. I would also like to second something Commissioner McHenry brought up, which you started to articulate how we are building resiliency in our hatchery system. Clint, you talk about the partnership between cold water and warm water, and we congratulate the team on finding those synergies to make everything work. Jacob, question for you. You know, we have active project at Bennett. We had recent improvement at Roaring River. We have other hatchery investments in the pipeline. So maybe just for commission benefit, can you share how you will build resiliency? Because we're not necessarily looking at increasing capacity of our trout production, but we definitely want to be aware of these more frequent, more severe weather events.
Yes. So when we have projects at locations like this providing these services, each situation is unique and there are different factors that we have to evaluate. But at Montauk, what we're looking at is adding some of the features we've already added at the other hatcheries. So with recirculation system, with water treatment systems like UV, liquid oxygen, backup generators, all those things that we can do to help us work through the smaller events. An event like this is historic and it's difficult to plan for and design for all those types of scenarios. But the other things that we look at is location, water sources, redundancy, and then any ways that we can mitigate risk or reduce probability of catastrophic losses. So those are things that our design teams work through very closely with hatchery staff through every step of the design process.
Commissioner, any other questions for this duo? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Jacob, moving on to the bigger, broader infrastructure management, please provide us with your project update.
Happy to. So in your advanced materials on the first page, under the maintenance and repair category, on line 5 at the Springfield Conservation Nature Center, that roof replacement project is complete now. And line 6 at Chesapeake Fish Hatchery, that roof replacement project is 70% complete now. On line 8, the regional office building exterior renovations here at Bush. As you can see, the project is going very well. As of the date of the report 3 weeks ago, the contractor was 40% complete. You can see that they are in the process of installing the new standing seam metal roof, and that's going very well. They're making good progress there. On line 10, at the Central Regional Office, the exterior column repairs. At the last commission meeting, I had noted that we had just recently opened bids, or we had a bid opening. Unfortunately, there were no bids received. We talked to the plan holders, got some feedback from them. They just couldn't fit the work in their schedule at the time. So we are planning on re-advertising that project for bids later in the spring when contractors indicated they'd have more room in their schedule to consider that project. On line 13 at the Georgia White State Forest Nursery, the septic system repairs project is design is complete. We had planned on advertising that project for bids to start construction this winter. However, with the damage to the bridge that I spoke about earlier, contractors wouldn't have access with their heavy equipment to do that project. So we have postponed that bid advertisement until we get the bridge back in service and we have good confidence the contractors will be able to access the site. On line 15 at the Conservation Commission headquarters, as the director noted in his opening remarks, construction is going very well. Contractors making very good progress. It's 20% complete as of date of this report, but those of you that have been around headquarters recently notice there is a lot of activity, a lot of interesting construction techniques being used, and unfortunately, we did have a water main get breached on Monday, but that's repaired, that's back in service, and I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we work through that little emergency. In the rehabilitations category on line 16, Roaring River Fish Hatchery, the liquid oxygen line improvements project, that bid opening is scheduled for next week on December 19th. Then on Line 21 at 10 Mile Pond Conservation Area, the well improvements project construction is complete. On lines 22 and 23 at Shell Osage, the large lake renovation and wetland renovation projects, we are in the final steps of getting the contract executed. The insurance has been bound. We just need the originals sent to us, and then we'll be able to execute that contract. We are anticipating a notice to proceed the first week of January. And then on line 24, the Conservation Commission headquarters, I spoke about that earlier. I'm sorry, when I spoke earlier about the other project, the Conservation Commission headquarters, I should have been speaking about Runge Nature Center. That project is also going well, and it is also 20% complete. So lots of activity on the first page of the report. On the second page of the report, under the capital improvements category, on line 3 at the Conservation Discovery Center, the entrance canopy replacement is 50% complete. Contractor is going well. The steel is installed. They're doing finish work now. On line 4, Hornersville Swamp Conservation Area, the road and parking lots improvements. We did open bids on December 5th. We're working through the process to execute contracts there because the bidding was favorable. On line 7, at Columbia Bottom Conservation Area, St. Louis, in St. Louis County, the entrance road renovation relocation project is going well. Contractor is approximately 40% complete. And then on line 17 at Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery, that renovation project, contractor is making good progress. It's 25% complete. There's a lot of labor on site. We've pretty much gotten all the materials delivered on site, so now it's just installation of a large quantity of piping and gates and valves and equipment. So contractor is continuing to work through that through the winter, trying to make good progress before the March 1 opener. Item of note for the commission is that we are working with MoDOT and state parks to actually close the road between the upper part of the hatchery and the lower part of the hatchery so that the contractor can install the piping that distributes water from the intake to the lower raceways. So there will be a short disruption there in January that we're expecting where that road will be closed. On line 18 at J. Thad Ray, the shop addition, that project is 60% complete. At Ted Shanks, the hazardous material storage building project is 30% complete. And on line 20 at Apple Creek Conservation Area, service roads improvements project, we did have a bid opening recently. Those were favorable, and we are in the process of executing that contract. And then finally, on the infrastructure asset management dashboard, just want to draw your attention to the middle there, the asphalt roads and parking lots. Currently, there are 66% of those assets that are past their expected life. Projects like the Columbia Bottom Road Relocation Project that I spoke to earlier and the headquarters site renovation project, those will be replacing some of those assets that are past their expected life, those asphalt assets. And so over time, you will see the projects that we are accomplishing will improve that metric. So that concludes my remarks on the status report, and be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Yes,
Yes, your report on asset management, which you just showed, and of course, you talk about asphalt roads and parking lots. And then you have multiple categories, HVAC and roofs and all kinds of categories. I know you can't predict exactly what's going to happen with these flood events, but you might consider adding a category related to the potential for flooding. I know the areas where we have low areas like we just saw earlier, which is a good presentation. And I think over the past few years, I've seen a lot of flooding going on our properties. They're going to fall in different categories of what needs to be done, but just maybe a category about, because it's liability is what it is.
Yes.
Anytime we have all this in a low-lying area, there's a liability for potential damage. Well, potential damage then creates a liability, which means it's an asset that we have to have financial funds. So we have a total there of almost $2 billion. So maybe that number needs to be a higher number, knowing the potential for future floods.
Noted. I will.
Make sense?
Yes, I'll get the team to start working on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick follow-up on the total replacement cost calculation. Does that include land appraisal value?
No, that is only the asset, the infrastructure assets.
Thank you. Commissioner, questions for Jacob?
Just have one more too, and it's going to tie into your next thing you're going to present. And you present it, and I'll come back and tell you what it was, okay? All right, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Jacob, please proceed.
Okay. So the next agenda item is an action item for the commission. It is a recommendation for authorization to amend the existing professional services agreement with HDR Incorporated of Omaha, Nebraska for the design and construction administration of the Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery renovation project currently under construction in Laclede County. The amendment would increase the authorized not to exceed amount by $208,000.00 to a total of $3,868,000.00. The amendment would also extend the agreement term from December 31st of 2025 to March 31st of 2026. Unforeseen conditions and insufficient construction progress per the original schedule has resulted in higher than anticipated effort by HDR to review submittals and respond to requests for information, requests for proposals, and change orders. The proposed amendment will provide for the anticipated construction administration services needed for successful completion of the project. The Infrastructure Management Branch recommends the professional services agreement with HDR Incorporated be amended.
I will first entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay. And welcome any discussion.
I think this is fine. I think it's probably a pretty reasonable cost considering what you face. My question is, based on the current schedule, what you're facing right now, at one time, I think it goes back to your prior report, you're anticipating completing this work by July of 25. Now, we moved that date forward, is that correct?
Correct.
So it's now,
It's the beginning of January of 2026.
okay. So all I would say is back on your prior report where you had your status of all your, just change the date on that from July of 25 to, like I said, January of 26.
The report was submitted before we completed the negotiations on the change order with the
Totally understand
contractor.
that.
Yep,
Just change the report, that's all.
we will. Yes.
Commissioner Anderson or Commissioner Wagner, any comments or discussion around this motion? Commissioner Harrison? None? All right.
I can't say that anybody is real happy about that. We want the project done. So if that facilitates it, we're supporting.
Appreciate that.
All right. Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Next, I'd like to welcome Deputy Director Aaron Jeffries.
Good morning, Commission Director. Just getting us here before noon. I have the next 5 action items related to realty actions. Number 10, Madam Chair, I'm seeking Commission's approval to accept the donation of approximately half an acre in Johnson County as an addition to the J.N. Turkey Kern Memorial Wildlife Area. This is a small wedge-shaped parcel adjacent to the area that will provide additional public access from the county road on the secluded part of the conservation area.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Okay, there we go. Any discussion about this donation? Hearing none, I will call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Continue.
Thank you, Commissioners. Would have liked to known that was private property back in college when I walked across it to go squirrel hunting, but you know, hey. Next up, number 11, action item. Madam Chair, I'm seeking the Commission's approval to purchase approximately 73 acres in Harrison County from Pheasants Forever as a new conservation area to be named Blazing Prairie Conservation Area. The area will be restored to high-quality grassland. There is some low-quality remnant on the area. However, this is located in the Grand River Grassland Priority Geography to help provide additional grassland habitat.
Do I have a motion on this purchase?
So moved.
Do I have any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Action item number 12, I'm seeking the Commission's approval to purchase approximately 140 acres in Pettis County New track will be named in honor of Dr. Harry and Lena Barrier. It would be the Dr. Harry and Lena Barrier Memorial Tract of Paintbrush Prairie Conservation Area. The tract contains approximately 50 acres of good quality ruminant prairie and is located in the high lonesome priority geography. The area will be restored to open grassland habitat in that landscape.
Do I have a motion on this purchase?
Second.
Any discussion? Yes, Mark?
Is this the one that worked with Missouri Conservation Heritage Fund as far as the barrier?
Yes,
correct?
this would be, if I may, just you look at Dr. Harry and Lena Barrier, what they have done with the Show Me Barbecue. They provided a check each year, came to the commission meeting in December, would hand a check to the commission, did that for 20-plus years. They had accumulated an account of well over $1 million for prairie and grassland protection. This is the last bit of that funding that was from the Heritage Foundation or with the department. And I believe we now have 4 different conservation areas that will carry their name, so that's quite an honor.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Commission.
Carry on.
Next up, action item number 13. I'm seeking the Commission's approval to dispose of 3.6 acres, a portion of the Worth County Community Lake. This will settle a property discrepancy with the neighboring landowner. This 3.6 acre tract will not affect the operation of the lake or public use, but merely documents the property boundary that has been in place for many years.
Do I have a motion on this action item? Any discussion? Just jumping ahead. I would just say, I think the commission always appreciates staff time and resources looking at our assets and figuring out if it's still a fit for our mission and when disposals are appropriate. So thank you for this. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the spirit of disposals, action item number 14, I'm seeking Commission's approval to dispose of the 11-acre north portion of the Powell Tower site in McDonald County. It is recommended that the 11-acre tract be disposed of by the department by transferring ownership of 3 acres to the fire department, the rural fire department, and selling the remaining 8 acres via public auction. The fire department deed for the 3 acres would have a reversionary clause that could be deeded back to the department if they cease to utilize the property.
Do I have?
So moved.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Deputy Director.
Thank you.
For the record, you got done by noon.
You are. No, I'm not.
Next, I'd like to welcome Michael Bill with a few action items for our discussion and consideration.
Good afternoon. Madam Chair of the Commission, Director Summers, it's my pleasure to present the next agenda item for your consideration. The department maintains an active forest management program on conservation areas using a variety of practices, including forest thinning, controlled use of fire, tree planting, and the commercial harvest of timber. These management tools are used to enhance the health and diversity of forest and woodland natural communities, which provide multiple benefits to both wildlife and our Missouri citizens. The use of commercial timber harvest helps the department achieve its mission by enhancing terrestrial wildlife habitat, protecting water resources that support aquatic species and recreation, and by sustaining healthy, vigorous, growing forests that contribute to local economies, including forest products and tourism. All these actions contribute to the agency's success in achieving strategic outcome 1.1. Missouri has healthy land, water, and forests in keeping with established procedures. I have 2 items for your consideration associated with the sale of forest products. First action item is listed as 15 on your agenda. This is a timber sale on Angeline Conservation Area in Shannon County. If approved, this harvest will improve forest health, long-term sustainability by using uneven age and even age management treatments, which will replicate natural woodland structure. This will increase sunlight to the forest floor, which will help encourage oak and pine regeneration, This approach will create diverse wildlife habitat as well as increase native grass and forbs. As such, we request approval to advertise and sell an estimated 1,272,028 board feet of timber located on 586 acres of Compartment 33 of Angeline Conservation Area in Shannon County.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Continue.
Second action item is listed as 16 on your agenda. This is a timber sale on Current River Conservation Area in Shannon and Reynolds County. If approved, the harvest will improve forest health and long-term sustainability by using uneven age management treatments, which will replicate natural woodland structure. This will increase sunlight to the forest floor, which will encourage oak and pine regeneration, reestablishing wildlife habitat as well as increasing native grass and forbs. As such, request approval to advertise and sell an estimated 6,386,003 board feet of timber located on 1,375 acres of Compartment 22 of Current River Conservation Area in Shannon and Reynolds County.
Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Any discussion?
Couple of comments. I'm just wondering, what are our total acreage? Where are we up to?
Total volume, you're saying board feet or acres?
I'm sorry, board feet.
Yeah. So we currently have, with this, we just, last commission meeting had 900,000, about 1 million feet approved. This will be 7.5 million feet. And with discussion with the regions this week, seeing where everybody is, there's at least 8 million board feet ready to go. So we'll be way beyond the 14 million feet, looks like, this year. We also had some sales that you guys approved in May that made it, they didn't get sold until this fiscal year. So we've actually got 7 million board feet already that's been our contract since July 1. So got a lot of volume moving out there. Markets are pretty soft. So we're still getting decent bids for the most recent sales. So we continue forward here.
And just, the only reason I asked this question, of course, you and I have talked about it, but it's nice to have it on the public record. I first came on the commission, there was a lot of criticism on our timber management and, lack of harvest and the impact it had on the small communities and just a whole host of things. And, like to focus on areas where we get criticism and maybe it's valid, maybe not, but I haven't heard any criticism on this. And I really appreciate, it's the whole team of, getting timber marked and all that sort of thing, and really appreciate it because it's been a real positive move for the department.
I appreciate it. Part of that's been through some of our contract dollars we've made available to help contractors help us to get the work done with other priorities around CWD and other aspects. That's helped move the deal forward with our timber target there. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
This talks about oak and pine. Is there hickory involved or walnut or any other hardwoods?
Both of these locations are within the Ozarks, and not a whole lot of walnut. There may be some in some of the drainages, maybe especially the Current River site there. There is a lot of hickory on these sites. There's other species like black gum and elm. We do manage for mass species like hickory as well. It's just the majority of the volume will be in oak.
Okay, that's the bulk, but there is some of that.
Oh, yeah, for certain. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Excellent. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
you,
you.
Michael, very much. Aaron, you're back for the sequel and the conclusion.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'm going to bet that Michael Bills probably worked on both of those sites when he was a four. Yep, he's shaking his head yes. So I don't know. I really take a lot of pleasure in seeing folks come up here, advancing the agency, knowing that something that they're selling right here that they worked on in the past. But I have the last item on the agenda. It's a lengthy legislative update, so please bear with me. Oh, thank you. I could filibuster for a half hour, but I don't think I will. Pre-filing for the 2025 legislative session started on January 2nd. The first day of session will be January 8th, 2025. We have 52 new state representatives. We'll have 11 new state senators once all the vacancies are filled. At this time, we have no legislation of interest for the commission. We are tracking a few sales tax exemption bills, a few other minor bills. But currently there are 571 House bills that have been pre-filed and 551 Senate bills, so lots of ideas out there. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Commission, any questions for Deputy Director Jeffries?
No, I just want to mention great job, and then I know you they've always got Jake there to help you out too. So I don't know, he is not here.
Watching, but we do make a pretty darn good team. So,
Make a great team. So anyway, good job, guys.
thank you.
Just to add to that, when Mark and I first came on the commission, it seemed like we spent a third of our discussions on legislative issues. And I know that there's other dynamics, but you guys, we haven't had any of those discussions in probably 2 years. And that's really refreshing. And thanks, Aaron, appreciate
Well,
it.
exactly. And taking these tours out and seeing some of our properties and stuff with our elected officials, I think is a big part of that. And I know both you, Aaron, and Jake have both done that. And building good relationships, good communication.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much, Aaron.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. I only have one other matter of interest, and that is to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2025. With that, we are adjourned.